everyone. This is the Wednesday, May 12th, 2021 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Please call the roll.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Rubio.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video and teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, www.portlandoregon.gov/video, and Channel 30. The public can also provide written testimony to council by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you for your patience, your flexibility, and your understanding as we manage through this challenging situation to conduct the city's business. With that, we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To participate in city council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at portlandoregon.gov/auditor contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the city council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you're a lobbyist. If you're representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the council meeting. Please be aware that council meetings are recorded.
Thank you. We have one item for this afternoon, item 344. Please, Keelan.
Amend the zoning map, Title 33 Planning and Zoning, and Title 32 Signs and Related Regulations to implement the Design Overlay Zone Amendments project to update the process and tools of the Design Overlay Zone and related code sections.
Thank you. Before I invite Commissioner Rubio to give opening remarks on behalf of the Bureau on Planning and Sustainability, legal counsel has advised that we disclose any conflicts of interest. I want to announce that I rent property that is not in the D overlay. Only properties in the D overlay are impacted by DOZA. I do not believe I have a conflict of interest potential or otherwise. However, out of an abundance of caution, I'm disclosing that I do not reside within the D overlay. Do any other of my colleagues have any conflicts of interest to disclose at this time? Seeing none, Commissioner Hardesty, then Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. I do not believe I have any conflict or any perceived conflict with what we are hearing today, but with an abundance of caution, I will say I rent, but don't believe that our actions will have any impact on no special privileges because I'm a renter in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Ryan.
Sure. I want to announce that I own property that is not in the D overlay. Only properties of the D overlay are impacted by DOZA. I do not believe I have a conflict of interest, potential or otherwise. However, out of an abundance of caution, I am disclosing that I do not own property within the D overlay.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Any other commissioners wish to disclose? Commissioner Maps?
I do not live in a D overlay, nor do I own property in a D overlay.
Thank you, Commissioner Maps. And Commissioner Rubio.
I want to also announce that I do not own property in the design overlay zone.
Very good. For the record, no city commissioner has a stated conflict of interest, real or perceived. And with that, Commissioner Rubio, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm proud and excited to introduce the Design Overlay Zone Amendments project to City Council today. Since I was assigned the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability in January, my staff and I have been learning about Oregon and Portland's nationally recognized urban planning program. Part of that legacy includes a design review program that was first introduced in the Central City in the 1970s and then expanded throughout the city. As we heard at the Design Commission State of Design report presentation a couple of weeks ago on April 29th, design makes a difference in so many dimensions of our world. It affects the quality of the buildings that we see and use every day, and it also affects how we move through our city. In other words, design is a key element of building an inclusive and accessible city. Before we hear about how the DOZA project does this, I'd like to thank staff from the Bureaus of Planning and Sustainability and the Development Review for an impressive amount of work that they undertook and an extensive public outreach. I'd also like to thank the Planning and Sustainability Commission and Design Commission for holding hearings and making amendments to this proposal prior to making their recommendations to us. Finally, I want to thank those who have already submitted public testimony and who will testify today. I'm eager to hear how they think this proposal might be strengthened. I'll now turn it over to BPS Director Durbin to introduce her team.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rubio, Mayor, and members of City Council. I'm Andrea Durbin, Director of Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We're excited to be sharing the Design Overlay Zone Amendment Recommendations, or DOZA, with you today. DOZA has been a multi-year project that began with a consultant assessment in 2016 and an extensive public input process. Many of the proposals before you are a result of recommendations from that assessment. This is coming to City Council at a difficult time in our city, a time when you are rightly focused on urgent and pressing issues, including the pandemic and stabilizing households and businesses, addressing the needs of our houseless community, cleaning up downtown and neighborhoods, racial justice, and economic recovery. The DOZA proposals don't share that sense of urgency, but they do position us to build back better as the economy begins to recover. Construction and development have always been a key driver in economic recovery, and these proposals make it easier and quicker for new construction to come online while meeting our community's goals for creating vibrant, people-centered urban places. The pandemic has reinforced that having quality outdoor spaces is crucial to our mental and physical well-being. These spaces are important to urban life, and ensuring that they are well designed is one of the many benefits of this proposal. DOZA is a unique project that it requires the recommendation of two commissions, the Planning and Sustainability Commission, which BPS supports, and the Design Commission, which BDS supports. The PSC's recommendation is on the zoning code and map amendments, while the Design Commission's recommendation is on the design guidelines. Kat Schultz and Julie Livingston are here to present their commission's recommendations. I'd like to thank the commissions for their efforts in staying aligned on the broader goals and for recommending a holistic and cohesive design review program to City Council. I'd like to thank my staff at BPS for their work on this project, and also thank Director Isa and her staff at BDS for their partnership over the years. We couldn't have done this work without them. And now I'd like to invite our staff, Sandra Wood and Laura Patino-Lillard, to present the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Durbin, and hello, City Council members. It's nice to be here with you today, and thank you for having us. A couple weeks ago at the State of Design report presentation, you saw some real-life examples of development projects approved by the Design Commission. Today, we're kind of going behind the scenes, and we'll be sharing the DOZA proposals that improve every aspect of the design review program, from the rules about how projects are reviewed to who reviews them and what criteria are used. Laura and I are presenting on behalf of a 6-member project team, and we've put their names on this slide, both from our Bureau and the Bureau of Development Services. And I'm sure during our time together at City Council, we'll be calling upon our colleagues for their expertise to share with you. I'll be sharing the project context today. Laura will then present the proposals. Afterwards, Commissioners Schultz and Livingston will highlight some points from their commission's recommendations, but the bulk of today's meeting is really reserved for you to hear public testimony. We have 61 people signed up who registered to testify, and we're really hopeful that we can hear from everyone. In the event that we can't, we reserve time on the council's May 26th agenda for people who signed up today for today's hearing but are not able to speak. So I'll start with a little project context. As you heard, Portland's design review program has been in place since the 1970s. And like any tool, it needs to be reevaluated and refreshed from time to time. In this case, a refresh is needed to reflect the values that Portlanders put forth in the new comprehensive plan. Those goals are about fostering economic prosperity, improving opportunities for Portlanders to lead healthy and active lives, weaving nature into the city, and fostering a healthy environment, promoting equity and environmental justice, and improving our resilience. In other words, our ability to withstand, recover, and adapt to change. The design overlay tool is really a growth management tool at its core. We expect about 60% of new housing units to be built in areas with this overlay. At the outset of the project, we asked ourselves, well, what improvements could be made for the greatest benefit and the least burden to all participants? First, we reaffirmed that the city should be designed for people, since we apply this overlay zone where most people live, work, and shop. Not only are we striving for a city that is physically designed for people, but we're striving for a process that includes many voices and for people to be able to discuss design in everyday language. Second, we asserted that good design does not have to be expensive or overly burdensome. DOZA decreases the time it takes for projects to get approved. It also decreases the cost of the development itself. Finally, DOZA provides a greater certainty while providing for more flexibility by introducing a new way of looking at standards through a menu option. Laura will get into that in a little bit when she describes it. So in sum, DOZA revises the design review program to support high quality design as efficiently as possible. This project started about 5 years ago. We started in 2016 with an assessment led by a consultant team from Walker Macy. They studied design review programs in peer cities and conducted around 50 site and building observations from recently built projects all over the city. They also conducted extensive outreach, starting with a survey and interviewing many stakeholders listed on this slide. Their work culminated in about 24 recommendations that were unanimously accepted by City Council in 2017. Those recommendations make up the bulk of the amendments in DOZA. They also recommended many administrative improvements that didn't need council approval. Our partners at BDS and the Design Commission have already made most of those changes, and they're outlined in the appendix of our report. Our legislative process began after the assessment. For the discussion draft, we hired 3 architectural teams to draw, design, and test different scenarios and share them with the public. We wanted to see if the criteria we had drafted resulted in the outcomes the community was calling for. This testing phase led to several changes that are now included in the proposal. The proposed draft included a joint hearing with the 2 commissions and continued collaboration between them. In addition to the outreach conducted through the assessment, staff held 5 in-person open houses. We also attended meetings focusing on different audiences. The Design and Planning and Sustainability Commission held joint hearings, and of course, you'll be hearing from testifiers today. In addition, you've received over 150 pieces of written testimony that are waiting for you to just read it. The DOZA proposals consist of 4 volumes. The first is a staff report that explains the proposals and the why of the proposal. Why are we proposing it? What are the benefits of each of these changes? The code and map amendments are coming from the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and Commissioner Schultz will speak to those. The Portland Citywide Design Guidelines are recommended by the Design Guidelines, and Commissioner Livingston will speak to those. And then we have a couple of amendments, appendices. But before I hand it off to Laura, I wanted to note that the project record is available in the city's public electronic filing system. The record can be found by searching DOZA at the address shown on this slide. And if members of the public have trouble accessing the full project record, please contact our teammate, Phil Namany. His email address is shown on the slide also. So now Laura will share the details of the proposal. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. The proposal is outlined in 5 general buckets, and I'll go over each of these in more detail. The purpose, map, thresholds, the process for design review, and the tools for evaluating projects. First, because the design overlay zone supports where the city is growing, as Sandra mentioned, and how the city evolves within our current centers and emerging centers, we are pivoting from a design overlay that focuses on buildings as objects that need to fit in with other objects to buildings that are designed for people and in harmony with nature. By using language directly from our comprehensive plan, we're affirming these 3 tenets: build on context, not just the architectural context, but also social and natural context. Contribute to public realm, how is a building experienced from the public streets and sidewalks, and promote quality and long-term resilience in the whole development. These 3 tenets are the foundation of our work. Design overlay is applied to our largest centers, and through our comprehensive plan in 2018, it was added to some of the smaller centers where development pressure is high, places like Alberta, Selwood, Belmont, Hawthorne, and Division. 2 points I want to make about this map. The first is that we asked the public if we should expand the D-overlay to all of the smallest centers, including those with less development pressure. And public discussion on that topic was mixed. So in some ways, this is about the road not taken, but it's worth including that we were trying to honor what we heard, and we decided to focus DOZA on improving the design overlay program before considering an expansion. And second, because design overlay is intended to focus on projects that will have a big impact on community, it should not include single dwelling zone properties where only small projects are allowed. The third bucket is about thresholds, and there's a lot on this slide. We're going to spend a bit of time on it because it's a framework for who reviews what and when. And DOZA is right-sizing the review process based on the impact of development, size, and scale. We are proposing a higher level of review for larger projects and a lower level of review or an exemption entirely for smaller projects. And this is different from today, which is based on project evaluation. For the exemptions, we've added more exemptions, including small additions and remodels. These projects have less impact and are usually made by individual business and property owners, so additional regulations can be a barrier to making small improvements. If a project is not exempt, like a large alteration or a new building, it has a choice in what we call the 2-track system, which is that middle blue row. On the left side is a design plan check, where approval is granted as part of an application for a building permit. So it's faster, but it involves less public input. The regulations for this track are called standards, and they're clear and objective. So you either meet them or you don't. They are quantifiable, like a building must provide weather protection over main entries that must meet specific dimensions. If an applicant can't meet the standards, or if the building is too big, or if an applicant would like more flexibility than the standards offer, an applicant can go through the design review track. Design review uses discretion. And depending on the size of the project, the decision maker is either a design commission for the larger projects or staff for smaller projects. And I want to note that DOZA is proposing that larger affordable housing projects have a choice to either go through the design commission or through a staff review. And this aligns with a threshold that was established during the housing emergency by council. For all design reviews, the approval criteria is called design guidelines, and they are qualitative, like design your front entries to be active and welcoming to pedestrians along the street. One DOZA amendment that you'll hear a lot of testimony about today is that the threshold for projects that can meet the clear and objective standards track in a design plan check was raised to 75 feet, which is around 7 stories, if you're not in Central City or Gateway. And today that threshold is 55 feet. Commissioner Schultz will walk through the PSC's reasoning for making this recommendation. And before we leave this slide, I'll mention that the 4th bucket of proposals is all about the discretionary design review track that's on the right side of your screen. And the 5th bucket is about those tools, the design standards and the design guidelines that are used in either track. The 4th bucket is about design review only. So 2 key changes of the design of the DOZA amendments. The first.
Before we move off of that,
sure.
Hardesty had a question.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Laura. Could we go back one slide, please? When you say affordable housing, being able to have options, what do you mean when you say affordable housing?
I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
We mean a city subsidized project with 20% of households earning no more than 60% of MFI.
It matters what the MFI amount is, so thank you for putting that on the record.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, that is the same threshold that was established during the housing emergency. So we were copying that same language straight from the housing emergency
The
ordinance.
first one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. So two of the key changes from this number 4 bucket. The first is the makeup of Design Commission. As you may recall, Design Commission is made up of 7 volunteers. There's currently 1 spot reserved for a member of the Regional Arts and Culture Council and 1 public at large, while the other 5 draw from a pool of applicants that have expertise in design, development, engineering, construction, etc. The DOZA amendments add 2 reserved spots, 1 for sustainable building practices and 1 for a natural resources expert, which leaves 3 slots rather than the 5 to draw from the subject expertise in design. The second significant change is limiting what's on the table for discussion in discretionary design reviews. And what's on the table includes things like material, color, parking areas, open areas, landscaping, tree preservation. These are all things that can be discussed in design review. This proposal clarifies that while a review may evaluate the building massing and shaping and how that's distributed on the site, design review cannot reduce the total floor area or height. And you may recall that the base zones, such as commercial or multi-dwelling zones that sit under the design overlay, those base zones set the use and the height and the FAR, and DOZA does not change any of that. Particularly as these base zones have been recently adopted. The last bucket is about the tools or the criteria that guide projects. So I just want to draw your attention to the middle of the diagram and recall the 3 tenets from the purpose. These 3 tenets provided the framework that commissions used to ensure that their work was aligned, because the guidelines on the right column are recommended by the Design Commission and the standards on the left column are recommended by the PSC. Those commissions work together to ensure that they were providing tools that achieve the same outcome, regardless of which track an applicant chooses, based on the foundation of these 3 tenets. The design guidelines have been simplified and reduced to 9 guidelines, down from 16. And the standards on the left column cover many topic areas that fit into those 3 tenets. And just to build on that, those design standards, which are, again, the clear and objective regulations, include a small set of required standards. And these are standards that are appropriate no matter what, like requiring materials that are long lasting. But there were many standards that we didn't think were appropriate to require everywhere, but we wanted to encourage, like balconies, plazas, seating. Those flexible standards are now in a menu of options where an applicant will need to earn a number of points based on the size of sites. This flexibility is a pivot from our current system, which is a rigid set of required standards only. And we think this allows certainty and flexibility. We heard a lot of feedback about the desire to be more specific versus the desire to be more flexible, and we think this strikes the right balance. I want to illustrate this idea of certainty and flexibility. All 3 of these buildings have vastly different architectural styles, but provide features that we're encouraging through DOZA: taller ground floors, weather protection, materials that last, plazas, seating. The image on the left demonstrates a more traditional Western architecture. The DOZA amendments allow traditional building forms like the building on the left, but they also allow more flexibility in design, as shown on the other 2 images. Another positive change with DOZA: our current tools are about designing buildings the way they should be seen from the public sidewalk, like the building on the left illustrates. And that's important in creating inclusive and welcoming buildings and spaces. But the DOZA amendments expanded to encourage better design throughout, including interior plazas or playgrounds like the other 2 images. These changes center the comfort and dignity of people who live and work and experience the site, not just how the building is viewed from the public sidewalk. And finally, new to the design guidelines and standards is the idea that quality is about long-lasting and enduring materials, but also about resilience in terms of a building that's responding to climate, encouraging passive heating and cooling, reuse of materials and low carbon concrete, native plantings and trees, solar energy systems. Those are all new standards through DOZA. The DOZA proposals add up to a set of amendments that center people in the design of our built environment and make improvements to considerations of cost, time, and certainty with a process that is efficient and effective so that quality design is available and accessible to everyone.
Great, thank you, Laura. That concludes our presentation and the full proposals. The next two people we have to present is Commissioner Catherine Schultz, Kat Schultz from the Planning and Sustainability Commission, who was our leader on DOZA for the commission, and Commissioner Livingston from the Design Commission right after her, and then we can get into public testimony. Unless any commissioners have questions before we hand it off to Commissioner Schultz.
Colleagues, any questions at this time? Doesn't look like it. Go ahead, Commissioner Schultz, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for having me back at City Council to share the Planning and Sustainability Commission's recommendation on the Design Overlay Zone amendments. The 9 sitting members voted unanimously to forward this recommended draft to Council. I am excited to share the recommendations involving process and how design review is administered, and one of the tools used to review projects in one of our most urban and vibrant centers. As Andrea mentioned, DOZA is a unique project in that it requires the recommendation of 2 commissions, the PSC and the Design Commission. The partnership that formed in advance of these 2 recommendations was vital to the success of this project. During the length of the project, we worked closely with members of the Design Commission to ensure a coherent project and to avoid conflicts between the regulations and the guidelines. The coordination, including holding joint briefings and hearings during October of 2019, and the development of a cross-commission working group that met while each commission held additional work sessions in 2020. The PSC's primary goal was to revise the design review program to better support high-quality design in development projects through a process that's efficient and effective. This balanced the policies of the 2035 Comprehensive Plan update and the need for clear and predictable system. Our transmittal letter focuses on the challenges that help attain the project goals, but I want to just focus here today on a few key parts of our recommendation. The creation of a new purpose statement was key to ensuring that the design overlay zone focuses on a city for people through 3 design tenets: context, public realm, and quality and resilience. It also expands the objectives of the design overlay zone to include more equity and sustainably focused tools. The new objective design standards to improve the development of buildings and sites while providing flexibility through the point-based system. These standards bring greater design parity between projects that meet the objective design standards and those that meet the design guidelines through the discretionary design review process. It's this parity that leads us to recommend that these objective design standards be used as an option for building up to 75 feet tall, as well as for some projects within the Gateway Regional Center, which currently does not allow this option. This allows more projects within the centers and corridors the option to apply directly for a building permit instead of requiring additional land use review, while still achieving the greater design oversight, which is key. You'll be hearing a lot of testimony about this proposal. We strongly believe that the updated design standards achieve the community's goals for design and make our design program that efficient. As an aside on this, as an architect and a former design commissioner, I have tested these standards against multiple projects that my firm is currently working on, and I have found that these standards are challenging, but they're attainable, and most importantly, they ensure that projects achieve the goals that discretionary review ensures. Several of the regulatory recommendations focus on simplifying and clarifying the process. I wanted to highlight 2 of these for you. One, ensuring that the base zone allowances such as height and floor area ratio are not subject to reductions through the design review process. This helps provide certainty for the development community about kind of minimum base standards. Also, amending a composition of the Design Commission to ensure that experts in sustainable building and natural resources are included, and that the public at large member is not associated with the development industry. Our definition of quality design has expanded to include resiliency over time and its role within the environment. Therefore, the PSC feels that guaranteeing these voices on the Design Commission is very important. While the PSC's vote was unanimous, there was recognition that our design review program cannot be a static program, that it must continue and change over time. Items that will need to be addressed in the future include the following. Addressing the individual character of unique areas of the city. This is of vital importance to ensuring that projects respond to community values. This could take the form of character statements within the guidelines and additional objective standards to maintain parity with those guidelines. These character statements are just that, they're statements. They should not be lengthy documents that are onerous to update. They should consist of no more than a handful of key objectives that ensure the unique elements of neighborhoods are understood and respected. The use of a menu approach and a point system for the standards is new and innovative and should be monitored to verify that they are achieving the objectives set out by this project. The impact of DOZA on housing availability and affordability in the future should also be monitored. The above issues do not detract from a positive impact of DOZA. These issues should not detract from the positive impact that DOZA will make to the existing design overlay program. The Planning and Sustainability Commission is confident in our vote that the packet will result in better design and resilient development while providing greater flexibility for developers. In addition to our recommendation, our commission submitted a letter of testimony in support of the Design Commission's recommendation for the design guidelines. We are thankful to Julie Livingston and the rest of the Design Commission for their collaboration. On a personal note, this is my last opportunity to represent the PSC as my term on the commission is ending. I want to thank the council for years of collaborating with the commission and with me when I served as chair. I've learned so much from this work and I greatly appreciate the chance to serve our city. I am available to any of the commissioners if you have questions about our decisions and work sessions on behalf of DOZA. Thank you.
Does that complete your presentation?
That does. Thank you.
First of all, Commissioner Schultz, on behalf of everyone, thank you. You've been on this commission since I took office, and you have been exceptionally helpful, not only to my staff and to me personally, but to all of us here at the City of Portland. And we have benefited tremendously from your leadership and your expertise. This is a bittersweet moment. You've earned the opportunity to step back. But here you are making your last presentation to the Portland City Council, and you've really seen this through to the very end. And I want to just thank you and acknowledge you for that. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Mayor.
With that, colleagues, any questions? And then it sounds like we're completely done with the presentation and ready to move into public testimony after this, but I want to give my colleagues fair opportunity to ask any questions while.
Well, I do think Julie Livingston is following me. She's with the Design Commission. Yes.
Okay, good. Then I'll shut up and let's let Julie do her work, and then we'll see if any of my colleagues have any questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
You're great. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. It's very nice to see you, and thank you for inviting the Portland Design Commission to testify about the DOZA recommended draft. I think I have about 5.5 minutes of testimony today. Portlanders care deeply about the evolution of our city and its neighborhoods. So too do Sandra Wood, Phil Namany, and Laura Lillard from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and Cara Fioravanti, Stacy Monroe, and Gina Mesa from the Bureau of Development Services. The Design Commission thanks them for their guidance, collaboration, and very hard work on DOZA. The Design Commission embarked on this project with just 3 goals. The first was to clarify and simplify the guidelines used outside the central city in a manner that would benefit all parties involved in design review. The recommended Portland Citywide Design Guidelines accomplish this goal. They align with the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and focus on a city designed for people and a city built in harmony with nature. They are organized around the 3 tenets of design: context, public realm, and quality and resilience. And they recognize that Portland's neighborhoods are not static and that an appropriate contextual response considers the past, the present, and the future. This is particularly relevant given the typical pace of redevelopment in Portland. Our second goal was to build on the joint efforts of the Commission and staff to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in the guidelines and the review process. The new guidelines clearly acknowledge DEI and other values-based policies of the comp plan, like resiliency. We have also worked to make the review process more accessible to all members of our community. This is important because the D overlay is our growth management tool. We use it to foster meaningful community engagement and long-term livability around our neighborhood centers. These are the areas of our city that have felt so many growing pains in the recent past. This is a very small percentage of land, but the character of our neighborhoods matters to all of us. And so Design Commission and staff developed a charter, changed meeting management style, implemented regular trainings for commissioners and staff, and aligned the review process with the development team's design process. We also renovated our communications to increase understanding of and participation in design review. This means better availability of materials, better site postings, and now renters, not just property owners, are included in mailings. Our third goal for DOZA was consistent outcomes for both discretionary design review and objective standards. A subcommittee of the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the Design Commission worked with staff to correlate the 2 tracks. This exercise was largely very successful, but we realized there will never be true parity between standards and guidelines. And so, though the Design Commission has voted unanimously to support the citywide design guidelines, we are asking you, City Council, to reconsider 5 code amendments. Firstly, make parks and open spaces subject to the same thresholds for review as all other development proposals. Commissioner Brian McCarter will address this during public testimony. Secondly, maintain discretionary design review for buildings in the D overlay that are 55 feet tall. PSC is recommending a 36% increase to 75 feet. This hearing is the first opportunity for the public to comment on this issue, and its content and rollout contravene the goals and policies of the community involvement chapter of the comp plan and the 2016 deal council brokered with people who live and work around the neighborhood centers. Council gave them a voice in the projects proposed in their neighborhoods in exchange for greater height and floor area allowances in the zoning code. All members of the Design Commission have opposed this proposal for 75 feet since it was recommended, and because of its deleterious impacts on context, community character, and community involvement. Commissioner Jessica Molinar will speak to this during public testimony. Thirdly, we ask you to restore the Type 3 design review for affordable housing developments in the D overlay. This is an equity issue. Households that live in buildings that receive public funding should benefit from the same level of public discourse that informs, improves, and validates the design of all nearby buildings. People who want to use BDS as a vehicle to shave money and time off entitlements for affordable housing developments should look at the expense and timeline necessary to secure a building permit. Commissioner Chandra Robinson will speak to this during public testimony. Fourthly, we ask you to incentivize better building massing. This is an acute need outside the central city. Design Commission doesn't have the authority to reduce a building's height or floor area, and a building form that maximizes both, the frequent result of pro forma constraints, leaves no room for finessing a building's massing into a sympathetic response to sensitive existing conditions. Design Commission's ability to award a discretionary height bonus will allow applicants to use all available floor area and make design decisions that respond to context. Fifthly, we ask you to simply add the professional disciplines of sustainable building practices and natural resources management to the list of qualifications for commission membership. Don't make these seats mandatory. Design Commission is a significant time commitment, and more restrictions make it harder for people with full-time jobs and kids to volunteer. The same goes for people who don't have a background in a specified field, but do have relevant lived experience and an interest in serving. I'd like to close with a thought about the cost and time of the design review process. Critics have focused on this red herring issue on and off for the entire 40 years the City of Portland has performed design review. I've been on both sides of the dais, and it's my experience that the cost is a fraction of a percent of the overall project cost, and the timeline sits comfortably within the development team's design process. Willing participants approach design review with enthusiasm and the certain knowledge that discussion in this public forum will yield better results for the residents of the building, the neighborhood, and the city. Thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you. Sitting there tapping on the button and nothing's happening. Commissioner Hardesty, then Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Livingston. Let me just say that I really appreciate a lot of what you said and a lot of what's being balanced in this proposal in front of us. It does beg the question if, in fact, design review doesn't delay good projects from moving forward and doesn't actually impact the quality of the project itself. Why would we not want to expedite building housing that people can afford to live in, especially at 50% and below of the median family income? Clearly, the need is significant, and the pipeline is small.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you might be asking if design review can expedite type 3 reviews for affordable housing developments.
Well, I'm asking if it's even necessary for affordable housing developments at 50% or below median family income.
If design review is necessary. Thank you for the question. I think I understand. Yes, it is. Design review is significantly different from the objective track. It gives the neighbors that surround the building and the broader community the opportunity to participate in public discourse about the development. And it is not just NIMBYs and people who oppose development who show up to participate. There are many people who support affordable housing that have true understandings of how their neighborhoods work well and what their neighborhoods need, that will come to public hearings and provide input and good ideas for the design team, for the development team, that will positively influence the design of the building and will yield a better building, a better urban performer that benefits the entire neighborhood. Without the opportunity to do that, a lot of good input is lost in the process, and those affordable housing buildings suffer as a result. The residents who live in affordable housing should be able to live in buildings that are held to the same development standard as all other buildings in their neighborhood.
But it wouldn't necessarily be all buildings in their neighborhood, right? There's a lot of factors that actually trigger design commission review.
You are right. We are talking about a very small land area within the city. It is just the D overlay. But at our commercial nodes at the neighborhood centers, the D overlay impacts all of the taller development that's happening along those corridors and in those centers.
And my last question: the makeup of the design commission with the requirements of so many specific specialties must make it a bit challenging to have the most diverse design commission that we could have. And so what methods, what tactics are we taking to either change the requirements of who serves on the design commission, to increase the number of seats? What are we looking at to make sure that the opinions of the design commission are as diverse and inclusive as possible?
Thank you for that. We are a commission of 7, and it is a 4-year term. We do a lot of outreach all the time to find people that have the skills, the interest, and the ability, the time in their calendar to participate. Expanding the number of people on commission would increase that challenge. Making specific seats as set-asides also increases that challenge. I mean, I think that you're right. The more opportunity there is for a broader selection of professionals and people with an interest to sit on design commission, the more opportunity we have for more people of color to serve.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to invite staff to explain the intuition behind banning the design review process from requiring a change in floor area ratio or height. Like, where's that coming from and why is that a good policy?
One place it's coming from is the Oregon Revised Statutes, which is state law. It tells us that a discretionary process cannot reduce the density of development. Because our multi-dwelling zones and our mixed-use zones don't talk about number of units per site anymore, we basically, in recent, our code basically sets the maximum size of the building, and then you can put as many units as can fit inside. We translated that state law from being a density count to floor area specifically. So the analogy we've been using for our conversations about this is that the zoning code and the Planning and Sustainability Commission, when they set a recommendation to council and council adopts the floor to area ratios, which is the amount of floor area on a site, that's the amount of clay a developer is allowed to put on the site. And then there's a height limit. And in some parts of the city, there is a height limit a lot higher than the amount of clay you have. So you could do something really tall and thin, or you can do something, a developer could build something short and squatty, but it's the same amount of floor area. The Planning and Sustainability Commission, and I'll invite Commissioner Schultz to speak to that, felt strongly that it should be not just the amount of clay, but that the height that the applicant was proposing shouldn't be able to be reduced either. And it's not for the entire site, but for at least part of the site. Commissioner Schultz, did you want to say something more about that?
That'd be great. Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate the opportunity. So the PSC spent a fair amount of time discussing this, and I think that there's a couple reasons for it. One is we just went through a lengthy process to review after the comprehensive plan, to review the zoning code and set all of we took a lot of testimony and kind of set the base FAR and the base height for projects throughout the city. So we felt that dialogue's been had, right? And then to add certainty to those in the development community who are going through the purchasing of land, which you have to do prior to design commission review, right? So if you're trying to value what a piece of land is worth, you go to the base zone and you understand what the FAR and the height gets you. And height does translate to dollars. Higher up in the sky in some cases means better views, which means higher rents potentially, right? So all of that is happening before you have an opportunity to go to design commission. And therefore, since we felt we had already had the conversation with the community about what height and FAR should be, by keeping that kind of as a set number, then the development community has more certainty in their process. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions for the commissioners before we turn this over to public testimony? Very good. Keelan, how many more? Thank you, commissioners, for a fantastic presentation, and thank you also to our very able staff. Keelan, how many folks do we currently have signed up for public testimony?
On the line, we have about 42 people.
42. So why don't we do this? Why don't we try to do 2 minutes of testimony, but if people need to go a little over, If you're at 2 minutes and you're not done, if you could really just make your core points and then wrap it up, and let's see if we can get everybody in who wants to testify. Colleagues, does that work for you? Does that seem like the right strategy? I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Keelan, I'll let you manage the public testimony portion of the program.
Thank you, Mayor. The first three we have up are Jessica Molinar, Chandra Robinson, and Brian McCarter.
I was going to share a video or a slide. I'm sorry. Is that possible?
Yes. Jessica, do you want to share your own screen or would you like us to share it?
I can share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor. My name is Jessica Molinar, and I am testifying in opposition to the proposed design standards threshold that allows buildings up to 75 feet in height to use prescriptive design standards as an alternative to discretionary design review outside of the central city and gateway. First, I'd like to point out the areas of the city where this threshold generally applies in case that isn't clear to everyone. Here you can see that only the areas at the diagonal hatch are the proposed de-overlay areas, and that they constitute a small fraction of the city. If this 75-foot height threshold is instituted, this already small area will effectively be eliminated, leaving only tiny pockets of the red areas with the diagonal hatch subject to discretionary review when buildings exceed 75 feet. I was a member of the cross-commission group that was created for DOZA between the PSC and Design Commission, and have strongly opposed the 75-foot height proposal since its earliest recommendation. I'd like to explain two of the main reasons why, which are context and community. In regard to context, prescriptive standards are simply the wrong tool to develop the requirements that are needed for responsive design. Each neighborhood is distinct and its context can't be summed up with a few standards without becoming generic. However, through design review and guidelines, we can have robust discussions about context and carefully examine it to determine what is needed to complement and enhance it and determine if those needs are met. Also, standards are especially problematic at larger scales where the impact of new development is greater and where it can quickly overwhelm the existing context. In regard to community, this proposal removes the public from the development equation at a time when public participation is vital to maintaining and enhancing the neighborhood character that we have today, and when guidelines are finally moving to incorporate equity and sustainability. These buildings will be around for 100 years, maybe more. Because of that, and because no one knows the impact that new standards will have on our neighborhoods, we request that council err on the side that benefits neighborhoods and keep the requirement at 55 feet while monitoring the outcomes to see how effective they are and if they are successful at providing the same quality of urban environment as the new guidelines.
Thank you. Keelan, are you muted?
You know what? I was. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
Next up.
Thank you, Jessica.
Next up, we have Chandra Robinson.
Thanks, Keelan. I would also like to share screen. Jessica, if you could stop sharing, then I'll start sharing. And I'll speak a little bit before I share, and I'm really just going to share a few images of affordable housing. But thank you for the time today. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a few things, which are the descriptions of the differences between the type 2 and the type 3 review processes. And what I'm really testifying about is the footnote that allows housing projects to choose between those two and doesn't require a type 3 design review for affordable housing. So the first reason is that the type 3 process casts a much wider net with public notice. It has a physical site posting and it provides a forum for the public to make comments that are on the record and heard by more people.
Yeah, Chandra, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
Did you say you were sharing something on your screen? Is there
I'm going to, but I hadn't yet. So okay. You weren't missing anything.
Good. Okay. And I'm not cutting into your time. I just want to make sure you weren't missing the opportunity to show us something.
I'm glad you did. And I'll just go ahead and share now so that you can see that here. And then I'll get back into it. So what I'm sharing right now are just some images of recent affordable housing projects that have gone through the type 3 design review process. So the second reason that I feel that type 3 design review is required is that the appeal body for a project as important as affordable housing should be City Council. When it's type 2, the appeal body is Design Commission. The third reason is that the Housing Emergency Ordinance that was passed in 2015 already provided an option for developers to choose a type 2X instead of a type 3. And since 2015, only 2 out of all of those affordable housing projects to come through have opted for this, this lesser process. And the type 2X process does save between 5 and 26 days on the overall entitlements process. And the current recommendation reduces that review to a type 2, even though there's very little appetite from developers to avoid the type 3 reviews because they want to be able to go before City Council in case of an appeal. The fourth reason is really to mitigate the concern about the review time that it takes to go through design review. The Design Commission and BDS staff can prioritize housing projects and facilitate those type 3 reviews within 70 days instead of the state mandated 103 days, which will bring that review timeline in line with what happens in a type 2. And as Julie already said, you know, households with little money deserve to live in buildings that benefit from the same level of public discussion as other buildings in their neighborhood. And those residents shouldn't be subjected to lower standards for community engagement or a lesser appeal body. I personally have lived in affordable housing projects my whole life up through high school. And it's really important that we, people who are of lower income and we who are residents of Portland, aren't stigmatized further by living in buildings that have lower requirements for community engagement. Community engagement is really how people who serve the city, like myself, are confronted with issues and inequities that we weren't aware of. And so I feel that's really important that we don't move away from those type of processes and instead move towards them. And that's the end of the screen share there. It was just 4 projects that have recently gone through design review and are all affordable housing. And the quality of those projects is due to the community engagement and the design time. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm Brian McCarter. I've been on the Design Commission for about 2.5 years now, but I've been a practicing landscape architect and urban designer in Portland for about 45 years now. I want to talk to you today about how the Design Commission has benefited the design of open spaces and bridges. Our responsibility as design commissioners is to ensure new projects complement their context, create great public realm, and are built in a way that will be of still high quality for years from now. Our guidelines are crafted around how we as citizens experience the city and the projects that built it. And in my mind, they apply equally to buildings, streets, and open space, since those are the big building blocks of city building. I want to share 3 projects with you, and I'm not going to share the graphics because I have kind of poor Wi-Fi where I'm at right now, but I want to share 3 projects I think exemplify how the design of open spaces and bridges have been positively shaped by design teams working with the Design Commission. The Pepsi blocks. In the emerging character of Inner Sani Boulevard, this 4-block, 6-building mixed-use plan includes a new privately developed plaza that anchors the project's main intersection and complements new and existing development, including the renovation of the iconic Bow Trust bottling building, the one with the curved roof. The design of the ground floor spaces in the plaza are completely integrated, and this project benefited from early design advice requests with the Design Commission before achieving land use approval. The Design Commission believes that a Type 3 review with the Commission should continue for privately developed open space and should remain a codified requirement. Now I'm going to step back a few years. Director Park in downtown Portland. In this case, I was on the consultant design team side, and my fellow commissioner, Zari Santner, was at the time director of Portland Parks and Recreation. And we jointly carried the design of the park through several early design advice requests and final approval in 2010. The Design Commission at that time gave critical feedback to our conceptual choices and decisions and helped shape the park we see today. We acknowledge that Portland Parks and Recreation has a long-standing commitment to community engagement in the design of new or redesign of existing parks, We also feel that because the Design Commission is responsible to design the guide of buildings, design buildings and streets that will directly interface with these public open spaces, that the commission should be part of the input that guides the design of parks through a type 3 review with the Design Commission. At a minimum, we believe we should require a design advice request with the commission so that early input could be provided. Let me switch really quickly to bridges. Bridges are sort of unique in the world of infrastructure because they're big, they're highly visible, they're very conspicuous crossing rivers. They can have a profound positive or negative effect on their surrounding. So we've been recently working with the team engaged on the Burnside Bridge replacement. That's Multnomah County Bridge Division and PBOT. Design and agency set out a comprehensive schedule built around federal environmental review requirements, which, as you know, has mandatory public input and comment periods. The design and the agency team skillfully inserted briefings and DAR workshops with our commission at key intervals with the Design and Landmarks Commission to get the larger urban design and historic preservation input at critical stages of the bridge design. These workshops were integrated into the overall schedule without any additional time or delay. And the response from the design and agency teams that we've heard back on was that input was invaluable. As you know, this bridge crosses so many different contexts. It goes over Saturday Market, Waterfront Park, Willamette River, East Bank, Promenade, Interstate 5, and the railroads, and it has to respond to all of those contexts. The Design Commission agrees with Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission recommendation that type 3 design review for bridges in the design overlay zone should be codified as a project requirement. And last, I wanted to say this has nothing to do with shelter to housing continuum. It's only for parks and bridges in the D overlay zone. Design advice requests are where we help an applicant understand which guidelines are critical to the success of the project and if it's heading in a good conceptual direction or not at an early stage. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Luke Norman, followed by Michael Anderson and Diane Lynn.
Excuse me, Keelan. Mayor, I had a question for the last speaker.
Is he still on? Brian, are you still on?
Brian, are you muted?
Brian? I'm sorry, Commissioner.
That's okay. He may be gone. I'll just put the question out there and maybe somebody will answer it later. And the question is really about why the need to have a design review for bridges. We probably build one bridge every 10 years. I just don't think that's a process that's broken. And I think adding additional burden and replacing bridges just doesn't make sense to me. So maybe somebody will answer that later. Thank you.
Commissioner Livingston has an answer to that. Commissioner?
I don't know if this is an answer, but I would certainly be glad to address it on behalf of the Design Commission. So, you know, bridges are the most remarkable structures in the public realm. They are the most significant structures in our city. They are visible from all around. They do a lot for placemaking, and they are integrated into our urban fabric in the same way, and in fact, even more so because they are an element of transportation that all of the buildings in the central city are integrated into the urban fabric. It is absolutely true that buildings and even bridges, when they go through design review, come out better on the back end after that public conversation through design advice requests and type 3 hearings. I was not on the commission at the time that the Tillicum Bridge went through design review, but the design before and after, if you look at the drawings, you can see significant improvements in the design in that bridge because of commission's input into the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Next up, we have Luke Norman.
Hello. Excuse me.
Luke, do you have more than one mic open? There's a bit of an echo. Now we don't hear you at all.
Hello. Can you hear me?
There we are. Hey, Luke.
Okay, sorry about that. Hello, my name is Luke Norman, and I just want to let you know that I'm a registered lobbyist of Portland Neighbors Welcome, but I'm speaking to you today on behalf of myself to encourage the council to pass DOZA. Like many of you, what I love about Portland is its neighborhoods, like Hollywood, Sellwood, Slabtown, full of restaurants and shops with easy access to transit and jobs. And what I love about DOZA is that it makes it easier for more people to live in those neighborhoods by allowing more buildings of housing up to 75 feet tall to be improved under the design standards. What's great about the standards and what you've heard today is not only have they been updated to reflect the comprehensive plan goals to meet our high design expectations, but they also provide a clear and objective path for approving housing outside of the central city, which is required by state law. The state of Oregon believes, like I do, that housing is a public good and that our neighborhoods play a key role in supporting it. And I believe that it's especially important for us to support affordable housing, which is why I'm proud to join the voices of affordable housing developers and supporters like Reach CDC, Rose CDC, and Housing Oregon in supporting the design standards for as many new projects as possible. I do want to discourage council from limiting the benefits of these standards by requiring more buildings to use the discretionary design review, which opens the door to appeals often used by neighbors to delay and stop housing from being built. I also discourage council from adopting some of the privately developed guidelines that you may have read about in the public testimony that can make it harder and more expensive to build housing in some of our wealthiest and highest opportunity neighborhoods. So I encourage council to pass DOZA with the Portland Neighbor Welcome Amendments to allow more Portlanders of all incomes to enjoy and live in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Next up is Michael Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners and staff. I'm Michael Anderson. I'm a senior researcher for housing at Sightline Institute. We're a regional sustainability think tank, and we think everyone who wants to live in a city should be able to. We'd call attention to the fact that in recent years, many Portlanders have not been able to remain here, and others have not been able to move in large part because neither affordable or lower cost market rate housing is being built fast enough. I'm speaking today in support of the DOZA proposal. We're informed by Sightline's own research into the subject and by about a dozen recent interviews and email exchanges with local affordable housing developers. I want to focus on one academic finding in particular, and I think the clerk can put it up on the screen if they haven't already. Thank you very much. I think it calls into question two ideas you're likely to hear from some other testifiers today. One thing I think you may hear this afternoon is the cost of adding design features to a building are small. Those costs aren't nothing, but generally that's true. You've also heard that the discretionary design review process itself is pretty fast, and often it is, thanks to the good work of the volunteers on the Design Commission. What this point ignores, though, is the risk of appeal. The 18 affordable housing providers and other institutions who joined a coalition letter with Portland Neighbors Welcome agree that the risk of appeal is both great and costly. On your screen, I've shared a chart from a 2017 paper from Harvard's Joint Center on Housing Studies that was based on a national survey of 3,000 people. It tested support for new housing across various categories. And as the chart shows, the closer a proposed new building is to the average homeowner, the less likely that person is to support its construction. Among homeowners, this effect of being statistically more likely to oppose nearby buildings is even more pronounced for regulated affordable projects. Those are the ones marked in blue here. I raise this not to impugn any individuals here today. I raise it because as we design systems that will shape our city, we should be informed by how those systems will be used or likely to be used, not just now, but over time. And the other point you may hear today is that neighborhoods should control their own destinies, and if some people in a neighborhood are able to influence design rules, then other people in that same neighborhood will be less likely to oppose nearby housing. Again, both this evidence and the experience of numerous local affordable housing developers suggests differently. The political scales of any neighborhood-specific process are likely to be tilted. It doesn't take a lot of people upset about a new building to send that building into years of costly appeals. Portland should not design a system that's widely vulnerable to such appeals. Thanks.
Next up, we have Diane Lynn. Diane, are you able to unmute?
Okay, Diane Lynn here. So sorry, I was well into my testimony. Made the classic mistake on Zoom. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Diane Lynn, Executive Director of Proud Ground. As you know, we create permanently affordable homeownership opportunities for working families, 75% of whom are people of color. We use a community land trust model to ensure that permanent affordability. I want to thank you all for your service. I'm testifying today in strong support of DOZA, but with the option for affordable housing buildings to use the appeal-proof objective standards, as Michael just described, as opposed to the subjective design review. This position is suggested in the letter we all signed off on, and we were one of those. We will not address the specific content of the standards other than to say that if it evolves into a neighborhood associations being part of designing buildings, it certainly can be costly and damaging. And most of you may know that I was the former director of the Office of Neighborhood Associations prior to the current name of the building, of the Bureau, and very much honor the role of neighborhood associations and how they've helped shape the city. In my experience recently, we were in pre-development for the 5020 condo building that was to create 40 permanently affordable family-sized units for families with historical ties to Northeast Portland, Black families with children. We experienced delays and threats of appeal from the leadership of the neighborhood association, and never did anyone express any interest in what the building was attempting to achieve for the neighborhood and for these families. Sadly, days before closing on this important building, of which City Council enthusiastically supported last March, COVID-19 hit and the financing for the project was compromised and we were not able to recover. This project will now be a rental building, which is great, but not what the city promised to the community: a chance to own a unit, build generational wealth, and reestablish the ties to the neighborhood that they or their families were displaced from. Did design review specifically kill the project? No, but the challenges that we faced over a 3-year window, including all the requirements and processes, definitely played a part in delaying the project and did drive up costs. All of these factors, and remember, this is a layer on effect of all the impacts of the city's requirements, definitely destabilized the project. Again, most of you know, I grew up here in Portland, support the design review process strongly. And I know there's multitudes of values that are built into this process, but it's now clear that we are in desperate need of affordable housing units. We want the design review standards to apply, but not in a way that can make the projects just simply unaffordable in the long run. So thank you so much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. We, again, support those with the Portland welcomes position.
Thank you, Diane. Commissioner Hardesty has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Diane, and thank you so much for being here to testify on this really important issue. I really think that you raised a point that I was attempting to raise a bit earlier about the downside of actually requiring truly affordable housing opportunities to go through a design process. And what I heard you say was that due to recommendations from the Design Commission, due to barriers that a neighborhood association put up, it delayed the timeline for the project to go through. And I'm curious as to how long that process took. And how much additional time was added because of the delays with the neighborhood association and with the design review commission process?
Certainly, and thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, and your question was spot on in my opinion. What are we trading away here? If I go back in my memory bank and try to and we did take the project to the neighborhood association on at least 3 occasions. So we did present, we did try to connect the dots with the people that lived around the building. It did get appealed, and I would say that we're talking about a 2 to 4 month window that had we been able to move through in a more streamlined manner, we might have been just that much farther ahead. Time and money, frustration, concern, and sadly a disconnect between what the neighborhood association felt that they wanted and needed and what we were trying to achieve in the building. And these are neighbors that are really enjoying the amenities of inner Northeast Portland. And they wanted what they wanted, and we understand that. But I think I can say with confidence that those kinds of delays did end in a sad outcome for this particular building.
Thank you very much for that, Diane. Excuse me. I will say, as a longtime board member of Human Solutions, I am certainly deeply aware of what delays, what the impact of delays are on truly affordable housing units. And so I appreciate you reaffirming that today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you. And actually, I have a question for Ms. Lynn, too. It's kind of rooted in your unique background, both as a public servant and your work on affordable housing. One of my challenges right now is trying to figure out the appropriate role for public input in design review. Where do you draw the line? I assume that you think some public input is desirable and just and consistent with Portland values. And I understand the need to also move these projects along efficiently. Where would you draw the line? I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And it's wonderful to be able to connect with you. I know you're a former member of the Bureau.
Yeah.
An important one. And I know you grappled desperately with how to help diversify neighborhood associations so more voices could be heard. And I appreciate that effort. I just going to jump to the chase and say this appeal-proof objective standards just may be that kind of sweet spot. There's a lot of wonderful work that went into this. We want these buildings to be great for everybody. And still, if there's an open-ended window, that's a dangerous cycle. And I think we can better support neighborhoods involvements when there are some parameters, so we can still achieve the affordability. I'm telling you, $5, $10, $20,000 of additional costs can just. We had to raise so much extra resources for this building, and still couldn't get across this finish line with the conditions that we were facing. And that's just a fact. So thank you for asking that. I think of appeal-proof design standards may be that sweet spot.
Okay, we can move on to the next 3.
So just before you move on, Keelan,
Commissioner Hardesty has another.
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick statement. It's kind of ironic that we have a city system working against another city system, and at the expense of actually expediting affordable housing opportunities for folks who need them. And so I don't think we're going to resolve the actual issue today, but I just want to put on the record that I'm interested in this amendment that won't slow down truly affordable housing units, because it is truly important that we are not putting barriers in place, especially for units at 50% and below median family income, because of the desperate need for those units. So I just wanted to fully disclose that I'm very interested in that amendment and supporting making that change. Thank you.
Keelan, are you muted?
Oh, I'm sorry. Next up, we have Roger Jones, Trisha Patterson, and Mark Wyman.
Surprise. This is Roger Jones. Am I unmuted? Okay. Thank you very much. We're hailing from the Hawthorne district, and we've got a need for some capacity to control what's happening with our historic district, which isn't really a historic district. That's what we need is a plan which we asked for 19 months ago. The testimony's in that Hawthorne Boulevard was requesting a planned district, but we don't have it, and we don't have a conservation zone. As a matter of fact, we are called out in the low-rise commercial storefront analysis, which actually should give us a lot more control over what happens in our neighborhood. Several projects that I would call in pictures if I had my screen share figured out. I'm sorry, I'm not good at this kind of thing at all. I'm really trying to I'm trying to do my best with what I think I know. Our pattern district that is seen as single story, all of the historic buildings that we have on Hawthorne. We've got a few at 45 feet that turned out to be 55 feet, and just gigantic buildings. If you're familiar with Porcano and what's next door to Porcano, we need to have some controls. And I'm sad that the DOZA proposal does not give us any of those. We need to put the horse in front of the cart instead of moving DOZA and the amendments forward without talking to the community. Anyway, that's my 2 minutes worth, I guess. Good luck on the future, and please stay in touch. Any questions, I'll try and take them.
Next up, we have Trisha Patterson.
Hello. Can you hear me? Sorry, I didn't.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, sorry. Hello, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Trisha Patterson, and I'm a volunteer with Portland Neighbors Welcome. While I am a registered lobbyist with Portland Neighbors Welcome, today I'm just representing myself as a volunteer. I support this project, and I hope that you will pass DOZA with the recommendations made by Portland Neighbors Welcome. I was delighted to see so many affordable housing developers, market rate builders, and architects supporting this project and the coalition letter submitted by Portland Neighbors Welcome to the MAP app. The option for new buildings in the D overlay to use an objective appeal-proof point system as opposed to a subjective appeal vulnerable design review process is one that many people can get behind. Delay and unpredictability can kill good projects, and the risk of appeal is great, especially for affordable housing projects, as we heard in Michael Anderson and in Diane Lynn's testimony. The way that wealthy neighborhoods have wielded the appeal process of design review by delaying or stopping altogether any housing development, and especially affordable housing development, speaks to the need for an objective appeal-proof point system. Design review isn't guaranteeing beautiful housing for low-income people so much as contributing to the short supply of affordable housing itself. I oppose the narrow and restrictive standards proposed by wealthy neighborhood groups, and I reject the idea that an objective standard system will produce unfit or ugly housing. Type 2 review and the objective path will not create a lesser standard for low-income residents. The standard path and the design review path should and do result in equivalent outcomes. Standards aren't a lesser level of design. They're just a way to follow Oregon state law and fulfill the findings of the Anti-Displacement Action Plan. We are in a housing crisis, and housing delayed is housing denied. Please pass this project with the suggestions made by Portland Neighbors Welcome.
Next up, we have Mark Wyman.
Hi, good afternoon. So thumbs up if you can hear me.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm here representing the Arbor Lodge Neighborhood Association. Our neighborhood is within the D overlay district, and I'll frame my comments by excerpting from staff comments within the DOZA report. But the changes in DOZA are meant to result in great places in which people live, work, gather, and recreate, rather than just clusters of dense development. And that's an important statement because we feel that DOZA is overlooking the single biggest factor to deliver on that promise, which is ground floor active use. I'm talking about commercial spaces, any type of public accessible space where people might gather, where a community might have an opportunity to build and get to know each other. What we're requesting is to extend the center's Main Street overlay, the M overlay, which exists directly to our south on the North Interstate Corridor and Overlook, and directly to our north in Kenton, and yet it is not present in Arbor Lodge. The M overlay requires 25% of the ground floor to have active use. We feel this is critically important and there's no real downside. You can look at both sides of our borders of our neighborhood, and you have the same developers building the same product at the same price. The only difference is that as you walk Arbor Lodge, the ground street level experience is passing by people's bedrooms and living spaces with the blinds drawn shut. If that is the ground level experience that DOZA is delivering, all of these other changes, while well-intentioned, really don't deliver on the promise of the proposal. This is a simple but really important change that we're advocating for to be included at this time. And the reason why it's important now is because we're losing key spaces with each month that goes by. We have 1,500 units in development or already in market, and we're losing public spaces. The Nighthawk restaurant, which I think many of you are familiar with, the iconic sign on the corner of Rosa Parks and Interstate, that's for sale now. And it's being marketed to developers for exclusive redevelopment, exclusively for residential use. If we don't act now, we'll lose that key corridor, and increasingly we'll have, exactly as the staff comment describes, clusters of dense development rather than a living, breathing community where people of all backgrounds can gather and get to know each other and really be the Portland that I think we all want to see. So thank you, and we really are hopeful that our comments, which are accruing in public comment, will be considered. As a final note, I would just say that we offered this during the proposed draft, and at all of the subsequent hearings, PSC and staff in their reports didn't explicitly decline our suggestion. They simply ignored it. It did not show up in any further testimony from staff, from the PSC. So what we're really hoping for is that you just consider what we're asking, and we hope that it makes it into the proposal. But foremost, we hope that it's considered and that the voices of our community are heard and considered here. Thank you for your time. Next up, we have Heidi Hart, David Sweet, and Anjali Halova.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Heidi Hart. I am a renter living in inner Southeast Portland. I support the DOZA draft with the amendments proposed by Portland Neighbors Welcome because I want more people of all incomes to be able to live in my neighborhood and other high opportunity areas throughout the city. We've heard today that affordable housing developments should be required to go through design review because lower income people deserve to live in beautiful homes. We agree that lower income people deserve attractive homes. We do not agree that going through design review is the only way to get there. The objective standards path and the design review path are designed to be equivalent in outcome. Standards aren't a lesser level of design. They're just a way to follow Oregon law by creating an objective path, as well as the more flexible but subjective one the city also offers. We know that design review can delay projects so long that they miss government funding deadlines or widely overrun costs, especially because Type 3 review often ends up at LUBA due to NIMBY appeals. In many cases, this means the housing is built far later than intended, as we heard today from Diane Lynn, or never proposed in the first place. So the choice is not unattractive affordable housing versus attractive affordable housing. The choice is flexibly attractive affordable housing versus no affordable housing.
In the midst of a housing crisis, this seems like an easy choice. Thank you.
Next up, we have David Sweet.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is David Sweet, and I live and work in the Cully neighborhood. While we won't have any D-zoned areas in Cully, DOZA will impact us in an important way. Let me explain. We celebrate the racial and economic diversity of Cully, a diversity that is increasingly endangered. Rising rents and home prices are displacing the low-income families, people of color, indigenous and tribal people who enrich our community. They are being displaced by people who can afford higher housing costs. What draws these people to Cully? Is it our lack of sidewalks, our unpaved streets? No, they come here because they are priced out of amenity-rich neighborhoods like Selwood, Hollywood, and Hawthorne, neighborhoods that do not have nearly enough housing to meet the need. It's Econ 101, supply and demand. People who are priced out of their preferred neighborhoods will continue to bid up prices in Cully and East Portland. That's why I support DOZA, because it will reduce the time, the expense, and the uncertainty that plague both nonprofit and for-profit developers who would build more housing in high opportunity areas. The clear and objective design standards will make it easier to add badly needed affordable and market rate housing to those neighborhoods. The recently published Portland Anti-Displacement Action Plan Foundation report suggests that we should incentivize higher density housing opportunities, especially affordable housing in areas that are amenity and service rich. By easing the path to build abundant housing in high opportunity, low risk areas, DOZA will support that recommendation. In so doing, it will reduce displacement pressures in Cully and in East Portland. I urge you to support DOZA. Thank you for your time.
Next up is Anjali Halova.
Hello, can you hear me? Good afternoon. Yes.
Yep, we hear you loud
Okay.
and clear.
Hi, my name is Anjali Halova, and I'm here to testify in opposition to two of the DOZA recommendations, the 75-foot height limit and the type 2 review for affordable housing. So I'm an equity-centered real estate developer here in Portland. I am testifying in my capacity as a developer and not in my role as a state commissioner on the Land Conservation and Development Commission. I wanted to kind of point out some issues that I think a lot of the testifiers have been saying that I think are untrue in many ways. I am really appreciative of the folks who are standing up in support of affordable housing because I think this is desperately needed in our city and our state. I think the problem is that people are pointing to the wrong problem and recommending the wrong solutions for what's going on right now. Design review is not a cost issue. It plays a very small role in a development project, especially at the scale that we were talking about applying this to. What really plays a huge role is the length of time it takes to get a permit and the cost to get a permit and the cost of SDCs. And so really, when you're talking about the timeline, when you do design review process, it's in conjunction with your conceptual and schematic design, and it happens parallel. So design review actually doesn't add any time to the process. And I think the only folks that have been getting tripped up in design review, frankly, are developers who don't have architects that are acting in a responsible manner to what our city needs and desires. And so I really want to second what Commissioner Chandra Robinson said in that what's really important is that we don't create a stigma for the folks that are living in affordable housing and that people don't look at buildings and say, oh yeah, that's an affordable housing building. You can tell that they actually become important parts of our fabric with great design. And I think the type 3 review is needed to make that happen. As a person who sees appeals at the LUBA process at the state, design review is not really a consideration that I've seen come up. And so I feel like a lot of the folks who are testifying and blaming design review for this actually are not a part of the development community and don't really have an understanding of what takes longer time. I live in Northeast Portland. I support affordable housing. I'm a big pusher of housing equity in the state. We really need to focus on the issues that are preventing affordable housing, and this is not one of them. Thank you for letting me talk.
Next up, we have Wade Johns, Brandon Naramore, and Matt Cunningham.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, great. Good, I'm Wade Johns. I'm with Alamo Manhattan. We are a development company that has done a lot of projects in Portland. First, I want to say it's a privilege to speak to the mayor and the city council. I know this has been a very, very difficult year for the city, and I appreciate your leadership, you guys stepping out there and doing a good job. It's my pleasure here to support the Design Commission's recommendations related to DOZA. We've read through all of their position letter, and we agree with them. Again, we've been through the process 5 times in the last few years. Most recently, the city council saw our Alamo Manhattan Blocks project, which is on 10 acres in the south waterfront on the Greenway and Water, which we'll be starting construction on in the next couple of months. But we have a unique perspective here. We do projects in lots of cities. And I believe that the design review process is really a pillar to what makes Portland great. The results of that design commission and city staff make the city really a wonderful city. A key reason we like to invest there. And you know, the walkability, the desirability, the practicality of all the input that we get for our projects is really good. I'm always amazed at the commissioners. And I know that they'll volunteer 18 hours a week or so. I've seen them spend 4 or 5 hours and once just on one of our projects. It's amazing with their qualifications, their experience, and how much time they invest of volunteering to make the city better. The city staff is fabulous. I'm sure you've all seen, just check out one of their staff reports on one of the projects. And when you see the quality of the staff reports they put in, and every project in the city that goes through gets the benefit of that, those kind of eyes going through it. So we're big recommendations of it. Just a few examples how they make our projects better, mostly with the streetscape, the sidewalks, benches, landscaping, windows, active spaces, make our projects better. We take those same lessons to other cities. Creative solutions, they help. I've heard inclusionary housing mentioned several times. We're about to start construction not too long on an inclusionary housing building. The design review held our feet to the fire to make sure it was a very high quality project with porches and balconies and gracious windows. They really do a good job in ensuring that. Also, the stakeholder process is an organic part of the design review process with the notices and the hearings. They're already a part of it. It's such a convenient, easy way to get the community involved in our project. So we really like how it goes, how it works. I like how Commissioner Livingston keeps everything pointed and direct and actionable. And it's a process we're glad to go through and makes our projects more valuable.
Next up, we have Brandon Naramore.
Hello, I am testifying in strong support of DOZA as well as the amendments proposed by Portland Neighbors Welcome. DOZA is not a choice between design versus expediency and affordability. Rather, its point system will ensure that our built environment is one that is both visually attractive and sustainable. But by moving from subjective to more objective standards, we have a wonderful opportunity to encourage abundant and affordable housing to be built in our city, and in particular, our high opportunity neighborhoods. There are lots of great aspects to DOZA, such as clarifying that the Design Commission cannot reduce the size or height of buildings and limiting design advice request meetings to 1 per project to remove months of costly meeting time. But that said, we can go further with this project, and that is why I endorse the proposal of Portland Neighbors Welcome to expand Type 2 review for all regulated affordable housing projects certified by the Housing Bureau, as opposed to only those receiving city funds. We should also expand Type 2 review for all buildings up to 75 feet that are using the inclusionary housing height bonus. Inclusionary housing is a potentially great tool for promoting diversity in our high opportunity neighborhoods and should be incentivized. Allowing larger developments to utilize Type 2 review in exchange for inclusionary housing is a win-win for the city and affordability. Encouraging inclusionary housing also means not doubling design standard points required for buildings between 55 to 75 feet tall. Building at this height should be the main driver for inclusionary and affordable housing, and it is better for the city to not set roadblocks for their development. Lastly, I ask that you reject additional hyperlocal design requirements, such as the privately developed Main Street guidelines proposed by wealthier neighborhoods. Please do not let character statements become de facto rezonings. And we should be following the guidance of Portland's anti-displacement action plan and encourage more housing and more neighbors in our high opportunity, low vulnerability neighborhoods, rather than let the specter of neighborhood character stand in the way. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Matt Cunningham.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to testify before you all today. My name is Matt Cunningham, and I'm a proud member of Portland Neighbors Welcome, as well as a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning student at Portland State, focusing on affordable housing policy and development. I applaud you all for considering these amendments to simplify the design review process for our highest opportunities, centers, and corridors. While there are many amendments being considered that I support, which my comrades here from Portland Neighbors Welcome have and will continue to mention throughout testimony, I want to implore you all to strengthen these amendments by expanding the Type 2 review option to regulated affordable housing projects that are certified by the Housing Bureau, not just those that are taking in city dollars for those projects. And also expanding that option for all buildings up to 75 feet that are including inclusionary units. Affordable housing development is tricky and budgets are carefully balanced. Great projects can die from a death by 1,000 cuts, and design review appeals by dragging out the process, which is expensive and introduces uncertainty in the process, is one of the most effective cuts weaponized by NIMBYs in our communities. Our city is in a housing crisis. We need more affordable housing, not less, and housing delayed is housing denied. I implore you all to please strengthen these amendments and also reject those privately developed mainstream guidelines, which will make it harder to add housing in our highest opportunity areas and deepen growing disparities in Portland. This last year has shown us that our community demands racial justice, and adding more barriers to affordable housing to providing low-income folks opportunities in our high amenity areas goes counter to that. Thank you so much for your time.
Next up, we have Matt Otis, Emma Dixon, and Johann Henderson.
All right. Hello, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Matt Otis, and I'm here to testify in support of DOZA. I live in an interdivision neighborhood, and I've spent years of my time volunteering as a land use chair and later as a chair of my neighborhood association. While I was there, a lot of the foundation for PDX Main Streets, which was called Division Design Guidelines, was getting started. And I could spend my whole testimony explaining how their recommendations are built on a lot of dubious information. They use surveys of unrepresentative groups, data mine and manipulate the results to get the statistics they wanted, all while repeatedly ignoring the request of more progressive members of local neighborhood boards. But that's not going to be any fun for anybody. So instead, I just want to tell you what I like about DOZA. One thing that I saw in the presentation earlier that I really liked was one of the slides said certainty and flexibility, and that got me to thinking. One of the things I'm really proud of in life is my kiddos. And one of the things I've learned as a parent is that to create healthy, strong kids, you need to create a certain environment for them while also remaining flexible to their individual needs. Take getting ready for school each morning. In our house, there's a few certain rules. You have to wear pants, you have to put on a shirt, you have to brush your hair, brush your teeth, put on shoes, and yes, you do have to put on clean underwear today, just like you did every other day. And then finally, an environmental review before we go out of the house. Do you have a coat? Do you need one or not? Beyond that, though, like they get to create their own style, and what comes out is just lets me see their character and let me see what flourished. And we shouldn't mandate style. What one person loves, another person might not like. I love my century-old house. My kid, they love houses that look like they were built in Minecraft. So you know what? Let's allow people to have this creativity and this flexibility. For example, the fair-haired dumbbell. It wouldn't stand out if it wasn't against something like the yard. So in conclusion, I ask that you limit design advice request meetings to one per project to remove months of meeting time to submit new housing projects for approval. I ask that you reject wealthy neighborhoods dictating what a street should or shouldn't look like. Who are they to really say? And then finally, I ask that you do improve DOZA by ensuring a design commission is always informed by affordability by requiring one member with experience living and designing or developing affordable housing. So give people clear guidelines, let them flourish.
Next up is Emma Dixon. Emma, are you able to unmute?
Yes. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
No. Okay, cool. Just a minute. I'm on the road, so hopefully my service stays good. So my name is Emma Dixon. I'm a renter in Northwest Portland. And I'd like to ask the commissioners and the mayor to support DOZA. I think that providing clear and objective standards for pretty much anything is a great way to reduce uncertainty in the process. You know what you're getting into. You can figure out how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take to get the project going. And I also really appreciate, I love walking around Portland, seeing all the different neighborhoods and sort of the different vibes that each one has. And I appreciate that there are so many really passionate people who want to preserve the character of their neighborhoods. But ultimately, what we need to recognize is that communities are made of people, not of buildings. And we currently have a housing crisis. So the more that we can create opportunities for more people to join these vibrant communities, the better we are going to be able to preserve a sense of culture and inclusiveness. Thank you.
Next up is Johann Henderson.
Hi there, can you hear me? Perfect. Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, my name is Johann Henderson, and I'm a registered lobbyist for Portland Neighbors Welcome, testifying on its behalf. We are a grassroots, pro-housing, pro-tenant organization dedicated to ensuring that all Portlanders can find and keep safe, stable, and affordable homes. We believe DOZA will encourage more abundant and more affordable housing where it is urgently needed. A few small amendments could strengthen it further. DOZA will address the shortcomings of the current design review process by creating a consistent path to creating more homes in our highest opportunity centers and corridors. Critically, DOZA expands the option to use design standards for projects up to 75 feet tall. In our outreach with affordable housing developers, the updated design standards were called out as the clearest and highest impact change this project can deliver. Expanding the design standard system means they can protect more of their projects from delays and bad faith appeals. The added predictability also reduces the risk these projects face with their stringent financing deadlines. DOZA also improves Type 2 and Type 3 review by making the criteria for approval clearer and clarifying the role of design review to focus only on the quality of a design and not on its size. To improve DOZA even further, we're asking for the following amendments. Expand Type 2 design review as an option to all housing projects that are affordable at least 60% MFI and all housing projects up to 75 feet tall. Today, only projects financed by the city and buildings under 65 feet have this option. Let's remove this restriction. We also ask that you require the Design Commission always include one member with experience living in, designing, or developing affordable housing. And we ask that you do not penalize larger projects by doubling the number of design standard points required for buildings between 55 and 75 feet. A 35% increase in height shouldn't require 100% more points. And finally, we ask you to reject calls for privately developed guidelines that could further restrict housing in high opportunity areas that may deepen growing disparities in Portland. DOZA creates a consistent standard for design review, and we should not carve out exceptions for wealthy neighborhoods that run counter to its goals. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Sam Stuckey, David Bausch, and Doug Flutz.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sam Stuckey. I live in East Portland, where I'm a board member with the Mill Park Neighborhood Association, also a member of the EPAP Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm also a licensed architect with experience carrying projects through Portland's design review process. Today, I'm speaking only for myself, but with these personal and professional experiences shaping my views. I want to put my full support behind DOZA's stated goals and implementation. I see this project as a much needed evolution of the way in which Portland regulates the design of new buildings. And when passed, it will help our city better respond to the interconnected crisis facing our city, climate change, and housing availability. The elements of DOZA that I particularly find myself excited about are the new citywide design guidelines. They're objective, clear, and concise, and they will create a more predictable path to approval for new projects. by not prescribing architectural styles, but rather providing a range of options to achieve high-level design throughout the city. Architects like myself can better meet the needs of the neighborhoods in which we work without jeopardizing the viability of our projects by wading through unclear and inconsistent applications of design standards. Additionally, aligning the new design standards with the design guidelines will ultimately lead to higher quality projects, as well as better satisfy the goals of the comprehensive plan. I also appreciate DOZA clarifying that the Design Commission cannot reduce the height or FAR of buildings, removing further uncertainty from the design process. As it works now, the zoning code shapes our design process, providing guardrails within which we work and our clients proceed towards new development. Selective reduction of the size of a building by the Design Commission creates uncertainty that frequently kills great projects and prevents them from getting out of the ground. I want to say that we've heard a lot of value statements being made throughout this process, values that include affordability, equity, safety, sustainability, beauty, walkability, among others. I don't think there's been a lot of disagreement on these values from anyone, but it's important to remember that our values are only as strong as the systems we put in place to bring them to life. The beauty of DOZA is that it transforms these values into clear, concise, and predictable design language that will lead to high quality projects. But it is also critical that we include the assurances that these projects that are the manifestation of these values are insulated from predatory appeals and delays that prevent Portland from building our best future. Appeal-proof design standards are a crucial ingredient to this process. I encourage you to pass DOZA. I encourage you to consider the amendments that were just laid out by Portland Neighbors Welcome. And I also encourage you to ensure that this legislation has the teeth needed to turn our value statements into valuable new projects for Portland's future. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have David Bausch.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thanks. I'm David Bush. I'm the president of the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association. I guess I'm sort of terrified, having heard so much about NIMBYs in neighborhood associations, to represent one. But I do, and I want to suggest just really one alteration to the DOZA process. And that is the parity with downtown on the height restriction. It's 45 feet downtown and it's 75 feet in a neighborhood where most of our structures are 2 stories high. Am I right? Is that incorrect? And I just ask that you consider that we have parity with downtown.
No, there's a reason it's not parity with downtown.
Okay. It's going to crush these little centers to have huge buildings next to them. It's not a NIMBYism. It's simply that if you put a 75 foot building next to 1 or 2 story building, it's going to dwarf it. It's as far as the context, it's going to crush it. So that's really all that I want to add. Oh, I will say one thing is I was old enough to live through the urban renewal period in the 60s and 70s. And I don't know if you guys remember Cabrini Green, but not every huge affordable housing project is successful. So I'd urge you to consider that. Thank you.
Next up, we have Doug Klotz.
There, now can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. My name is Doug Klotz. I heard about DOZA in August 2016 when a questionnaire was sent to neighborhood associations. I attended open houses in 2018 and 2019 and testified at PSC in October 2019. I'm glad that we're about to adopt this. For decades, design review has been required for central city buildings. Often several DAR meetings and multiple design commission meetings are required. Recently, unfortunately, there's a trend of neighborhood groups appealing design commission decisions to council, and sometimes to LUBA, but a lot of times to council. Privately, these groups sometimes admit that they are trying to delay a project in order to kill it. As others have said, the risk of appeal is great. The significant costs of this process, not only in city fees and extra architect's fees, but also in additional time and accrued interest on loans, are added onto the cost of the building, making downtown living more expensive. When the building includes affordable housing, especially 60 MFI and below, funding is often drawn from several private and government sources. This funding comes with deadlines. If not used within, say, a 1-year window, the funding is lost. Multiple hearings and appeals can stretch for several years in some cases, ultimately killing projects. This is one of the costs of using design review. Now that de-overlay has expanded outside downtown, the city must offer a clear and objective standards path. DOZA has rewritten the standards to clarify this path, to provide results equal to design review guidelines, and to be much more useful for builders. Allowing this path for buildings up to 75 feet high honors that state goal. The new standards will give affordable housing projects especially a great increase in certainty and lower costs. These changes mean the builder will know that the design requirements are fulfilled when they submit the permit. So please adopt DOZA with the amendments recommended by Portland Neighbors Welcome. I also want to note that even if that 75-foot figure is in there on allowance, that doesn't change what the zoning allows. So the fellow from Sunnyside neighborhood needs to be reassured that the zoning maximum height of 55 feet along Belmont is not overridden by design review. Thank you.
Next up, we have Henry Kramer, Heather Flint Chatto, and Patricia Cliff.
Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, my name is Henry Kramer. I'm a homeowner in Northeast Portland. I'm also a registered volunteer lobbyist for Portland Neighbors Welcome, but speaking only for myself here. I strongly support the PSC's proposed draft for DOZA, along with the Design Commission's design guidelines, along with the minor amendments suggested by Portland Neighbors Welcome. You have also heard and will hear testimony asking for you to effectively throw out DOZA and replace it with privately developed mandates supported and primarily created by affluent Inner East Side neighborhoods. I want to focus on why you should not do that. The DOZA proposal was thoughtfully crafted in full public view with the explicit goals of reducing time and cost in development and creating clear and flexible design standards toward making a fairer, less onerous, less expensive design approval and appeals process. It was developed through an open public process over the course of 5 years, including 61 open houses, meetings, focus groups, and briefings. It received over 1,100 public comments. It was proposed and adopted by a diverse cohort of appointed public servants based on directives from the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and the Climate Action Plan. Some people testifying today are asking you to, in effect, throw out the transparent work of all of those public servants and replace it with boutique design mandates developed outside the public eye by a small, unelected, unappointed, albeit well-meaning, private outfit. At a time when Portland is crying out for more housing, especially more affordable housing, these mandates would erect new barriers to housing, even stricter than the problematic design standards DOZA was meant to address. I hope you don't give these serious consideration. Public servants did Herculean work to get us to this point. A broad coalition of affordable housing providers are asking you to pass the current draft. Please heed them and pass DOZA as currently drafted with the minor amendments from Portland Neighbors Welcome. Thank you very much.
Next up is Heather Flint Chatto.
Hello, commissioners. I'd like to share some slides if I may. I don't see an option.
Keelan, what does she need to do in order to share the slides?
We are promoting her to a panelist so she can share her screen right now.
There we go. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
That's good. Yes.
Okay, hi there. My name is Heather Flint Chatto, and I'm a 20-year urban planner, former government urban planner, and I'm an environmental consultant. I have a small design firm called Sustainable Forage Design and Planning. And I have been the director of the Portland Main Streets Design Initiative for the last 7 years, because I saw that my neighborhood was redeveloping very quickly and didn't have any tools to guide them. And so jumped in, lending my professional expertise, and helped form an inter-neighborhood coalition across 4 different neighborhoods with 7 different organizations represented, which met for 2 years of monthly public open meetings with formal agendas and noticed minutes, and partnered with the universities on design studios, held design walks, open houses. We did a RFP and hired a former planning commissioner, Marcy McAnally. We hired Joy Davis, who's now the executive director of POLF. We have done everything in my mind that you could possibly do to engage people in this process. And Bill Cunningham at BPS has said he has never seen anyone do more public engagement than we have. So I would like to just let you know that we are in the midst of great change, and our efforts are really intended to support density, to turn people on to density, not as others are falsely attributing to us in any way, shape, or form, to stop development, to stop affordable housing. We want to make it better and more understandable to the public, but there's a lack of clarity and discussion, and there's just a lot of shaming and blaming. And so we want to make sure that as we evolve, that we don't scrape and replace, that we really do evolve and fill in, and that we can increase support for density when it's done well. One of these is contextual, this one on the left, and that building gets a lot of support. So we want to do it well. And many communities are asking for these same tools. If there's a little bit of extra time, I would really ask if I might have that extra minute that you mentioned is 3-minute potential, because we've done so much work. And we'd like to just clarify a little bit of the testimony that you're hearing, if that's a chance. We have some really great tools and graphics for you to highlight some of the work that we've done. I'm not going to go into this big, extensive slide, but this is the extensive work that we've done. Many, many, many more communities, thousands of people have been engaged to do work that is similar to what was done with Chinatown at a cost of $175,000 that we've done all for free, following every best practice I know of as a planner. And so cut me off if you need to, but if you're still interested, I would really love to share just a couple more slides, that we think that there are these unaddressed impacts to these smaller places, and that with better tools, we can actually really respond to that. And so if the design standards are at the 75 feet high and there is no level of design review, then we're missing some areas. None of these will apply to these smaller areas. So we just need some different tools. This is a quote from the DOZA tools report from the consultant. And this is a common phrase that we hear. And we hear from many people that they don't want to be division. So how do we evolve with the right tools is what we're asking for. How do we adapt so that we can pick up these patterns that work well for our main streets, that can work in modern buildings, small buildings, tall buildings. These are style neutral. So there's a lot of false narratives happening right here. No one is forming design review boards to stop development. No one is trying to say we should have all of these diverse sets of standards. What we're trying to do is say we need one set of Main Street standards, and that we are also proposing a set that we're bringing to you, including one for a design for affordability that we're basing on Walsh Construction's cost efficiency for affordability white paper. These are things that many buildings that you see now that you might look at and think, wow, great, more density, is actually more unnecessarily expensive because they're not following time-tested traditional design practices. It doesn't have to look traditional, but these factors really contribute to efficiency overall. And that there's human scale elements that are, and design features that are not about style and fashion, but really about function. And human scale elements actually contribute to support for a taller building that actually still feels human scale. And that without tools like context elevations to really see the impact and understand how something is going to fit, we may not be getting it quite right on the context tenet. So we think we can engender better support for density if we do it well, and that there are some areas you've already identified in the Main Street centers where you've noticed that they're important. There's something that needs to be done there. And we think that could fit well with what you're hearing from Arbor Lodge and Sellwood, that the work that we did in helping Sellwood are much closer to standards. and those could easily be adapted as a common set of Main Street standards. We've done a first pass at that for you. And so we would like to encourage you to support that future work as a prioritization in budget and staff work plans, but that they hasn't been engaged with the community about that. And that we really are concerned that the East Side is underserved, that they have not been engaged as much in this process with only one open house that we know of on the East Side. We're really concerned that the complexity on the standard side is really not understandable to people with different language abilities and also who just can't wade through complex policies. So we think that there's a little bit more to do on that. And we just really want to appreciate that you gave me a little extra time. These are some of the consultant recommendations. This is my last slide that I think could be better followed in this. And I would be happy to want to invite you on a Main Street design walk. If you would ever like to see it, I've seen people completely change their mind when they see it up close and personal and understand how these patterns work to make better density that is style neutral and more affordable. So I want to thank you, and I would be happy to share any more information with commissioners. We have a lot of great tools. Thank you so much.
Next up, we have Patricia Cliff. Patricia, are you able to unmute?
Sorry. Am I now heard?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. My name is Patricia Cliff, and I'm the president of Pearl Neighbors for Integrity and Design, whose goal it is to enhance our districts by promoting high quality architectural design that is responsive and enhances livability for current and future residents, businesses, and visitors who call this city their home. What DOZA does, and we are in support of the mission and goals of DOZA with reservations. However, we strongly object to, one second. We strongly object to, one second, the fact that height and density are being completely outruled as a part of the DOZA project. If they are otherwise allowed in the zone as part of design review, given FAR and height entitled status significantly weakens the value of design review. It means that in no case will surrounding natural, historic, or cultural resource compatibility concerns or infrastructure carrying capacity limitations, such as roads or designed bicycle routes, ever restrict the height or density below what the base allows. This is important because Central City 2035 never took a detailed property-specific look at resource adjacency, livability, and infrastructure capacity into account. It is because context is so important to ensuring compatible design. PNID fully supports PDX Main Street's design recommendation number 4 amendment, formally requiring that all design review applicants provide contextual site plan and elevations showing the proposed project within the existing built environment, including when viewed from nearby resource areas such as historic district and open spaces. We hope that the city and the Design Commission will carefully consider these aspects and not be rigid with respect to eliminating any consideration of height and density where it would affect the local community. And I noticed that many of the people speaking, have classified the neighborhood associations as NIMBYs and people who don't want affordable housing in their district. I cannot disagree more vehemently with this concept. The neighborhood associations, all 95 of them, have picked up so many of the obligations of the city that the city has not been appropriately addressing, such as garbage removal, graffiti removal, etc., and many more. And they are integrally involved with a bunch of volunteers in how these local neighborhoods function. And having them simply brushed aside as objectors to affordable housing is simply incorrect. and I sit on the board. I'm not speaking on that behalf of the neighborhood association, as well as their planning and transportation committee. Again, I'm not speaking on behalf of that organization, but I'm intimately familiar with how engaged this organization is in the improvement and betterment for all residents. And the Pearl neighborhood, by the way, has more affordable housing than any other district because it was put in there during the Katz administration as a requirement of the infrastructure that the city paid for. So it was a major, major city, private, public initiative that created more affordable housing that is incredibly attractive and should be replicated in our district. So please don't badmouth the neighborhood associations as being NIMBYs. I appreciate your time.
Next up, we have Aaron Brown, Dave Oddie, and Linda Nedicoven.
Good afternoon. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for allowing the opportunity to testify. My name is Aaron Brown, and I live in the St. John's neighborhood of North Portland. I'm calling in support of the Portland Neighbors Welcome position in support of the DOZA amendments. I hear all of the good faith concerns about the need for good design in urban development, and I just want to take it at a different level of scale. I'm less interested in the design of individual buildings. I'm interested in the design of our city. I'm interested in how this city can promote dense, walkable neighborhoods connected by frequent and reliable transit. My neighborhood, St. John's, can use a ton more housing. It is outrageous how expensive it is to buy a house. My peers, my colleagues, my family, I know so many people that want to be my neighbors, and they can't do it because there simply isn't enough housing being built. I saw on this previous slide a suggestion that the East Side was underserved in the outreach. I would argue that the East Side is underhoused. We need to be building a lot more housing so that we can address our housing crisis. And respectfully, I would also point out that the numerous people that have testified in opposition to DOZA today have all gone dramatically over their time limits. And if you do not pass the DOZA as it's written with the Portland Neighbors Welcome amendments, you are allowing all of these individuals to show up every single time there is a housing project that they don't like for whatever reason and continue to delay the construction of housing that we desperately need during a housing and climate crisis. So please move forward with the DOZA recommendations. I understand the good faith concerns about design, but I encourage you to prioritize the affordable housing crisis and the role that design review reform can play in providing housing that is more affordable for everyday Portlanders. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Dave Ott.
Thumbs up, you can hear me?
Yes.
Greetings, commissioners and mayor. My name is Dave Oddie, and I'm an owner of Holst Architecture. I have 2 points I want to quickly convey about the benefits of design review. On quality, time, and money, every single project I've taken through design review in the last 20 years was improved in one way or another by the Type 3 process with the Design Commission in a public hearing. Can it be frustrating? You bet. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Architecture is a subjective endeavor that requires discussion, collaboration, and compromise. Architecture is not paint by numbers. Please don't let pro formas and checklists replace public input and discussion about neighborhood context. Design review doesn't take more time and money, permitting does. And despite previous testimony, appeals are extremely rare. Only one affordable housing project has ever been appealed to LUBA. On the design advice request, or DAR hearing, some testimony today is going to point to 2 affordable housing projects that have been successfully built through a Type 2X process with staff approval, rather than a Type 3 approval by the Design Commission in a public hearing. This is true, and I should know. The Nick Fish that is used as one of their examples is my project. A main reason for its success was that it required a DAR hearing with the Design Commission. This hearing allowed early input from the public and everyone a venue to discuss big picture building arrangements so we could all move forward with confidence. But you're being asked to remove the DAR from affordable housing reviews. This is a mistake. Please keep the DAR for affordable housing to allow for an inclusive and timely public process. Speaking of my friend Nick Fish, I end with this quote from him about investments in affordable housing. Regarding other public projects, I never remember someone getting up and saying, I object to quality. I object to planning for the long term. Can't we go cheap? Why is it that when we build something that houses low-income people, all of a sudden cost becomes the big issue? Design review helped make Portland the place we all love, and no checklist can replace that. Thank you.
Sorry. Next up, we have Linda Netakoven.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Linda Netakoven. I'm here to support the new improved, more flexible design standards and guidelines that you have before you, but also to call attention to a gap in what the DOZA proposal contains. I work with PDX Main Streets. I'm speaking really on my own behalf today, as you'll see with my when my testimony continues. The list of value statements that introduce DOZA includes the following. The design of new development should expand and amplify the character and identity of a place and its community rather than diminish it. I'm still concerned that the design standards, which will govern an estimated 80% of our future projects, will not be adequate to help us uphold this value about diminishment as we grow. Our comprehensive plan calls for 60% of the city's projected growth to be absorbed in our designated centers and corridors. However, many of these districts have no plans or tools in place to help guide this growth and change. So the automatic response is to just say no. And having worked in the neighborhood system for many years, I'm really tired of that being the only response that people have to offer. When given tools, that response can be very different. I want to stress I'm not advocating for any kind of veto or delay power or reduction in proposed density for any community. BPS staff has already identified many of the missing pieces needed to close this policy gap in their section entitled Future Work. And I'd like to suggest crafting an amendment that calls for a set of Main Street standards, a Main Street bundle of some kind built right into the standards section. So it is clear and objective, but it at least prompts people to think about context in terms of how things fit with older buildings that happen to exist in the neighborhood, or at least the particular fabric that exists in some of our very rapidly developing de-overlay neighborhoods. I certainly support lowering the design threshold for review from 75 feet. Others have spoken about that eloquently. I want to stress some pathway for us to make better use of community wisdom. We have neighborhood plans, we have design guidelines, we have other reports, we have other sources of information continually evolving from communities about their preferences and their concerns. And I'd like the BDS staff to be able to refer a developer to some of these sources, that there's a design commission can look at them, although there must be a way that you can do this by making it very clear that these have no legal jurisdiction and cannot be used in any kind of a particular design review. They are sources of good information. I wasn't planning to talk about design review for affordable housing, but I have one concern versus the type 2 versus the type 3 review. As a neighborhood person who's very supportive of affordable housing, trying to get another one through the process 2 blocks from my house right now, I am concerned that the conversations that we've had with Julie Livingston about a building coming up on 30th near 30th and Powell, when the community is thinking about that affordable housing, it's a question of how can we best integrate that project into the fabric of our neighborhood so that the folks that live there feel like they are of us. They are not an island of some, separate group that has no ties to the rest of the neighborhood. And that's the only puzzle piece that I'm concerned about losing if perhaps people go straight through a type 2. I'm assuming probably housing developers go to talk to the neighborhood regardless. But I think sometimes some neighborhoods really want that affordable housing and want those neighbors to feel welcome and integrated into the places that they're trying to settle. So somehow to build that in, whether it's type 2 or type 3, that somehow that has to happen, that kind of conversation has to happen. I guess I'll close by saying, even before we began facing these multiple crises, I think there was agreement that we need to increase the availability of sound housing and commercial space of many types in buildings old and new, while striving for greater affordability, along with climate responsive design for our buildings and our neighborhoods. A greater focus on anti-racism, inclusion, and equity has to serve as the cornerstone for all these efforts. But I think the creation of basic, objective, style-neutral Main Street design standards could help us achieve many of these larger housing goals. They don't have to be an impediment. They don't have to be seen as causing delay. I think there's a way to do this that could, bring forth the best information and knowledge about this kind of, it's the interface question that we're always looking at, not thinking building by building, but thinking about the whole fabric of a neighborhood, the fabric of a corridor, the fabric of a main street. And that's the place that gets lost sometimes when buildings are reviewed, one at a time. So thank you very much.
Next up, we have James Carpentier, Jonathan Greenwood, and Mary Vogel.
Hi, am I coming through?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Honorable Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to speak a whole lot. I'm here on behalf of the Northwest Sign Council, representing the sign manufacturers in the city of Portland and beyond. Currently, the sign code Title 32 requires signs that are greater than 32 square feet in overlay zones be subject to design review. We believe to maintain this 32 square foot threshold for design review, not in alignment with many of the stated goals of the report, which refers to making the design review process more efficient and less time consuming for applicants. Therefore, we are respectfully requesting that the council consider the following amendment to section 32.34.020B1 to increase the minimum threshold for design review of signs from 32 square feet to 75 square feet. For the following reasons. Number one, design plan checks are allowed for buildings up to 75 feet, yet a sign greater than 32 square feet requires design review. Number two, you've heard it before, increased cost. This is a real concern for signs that cost at many times less than the design review fee, and increased timelines, 2 to 3 months or more, which can certainly negatively impact that business that needs that sign right away. And number four, an unintended consequence of this, what I call onerous restriction, which I haven't seen really anywhere else in the country, due to the increased costs and timelines, many signs are installed in Portland illegally without permits. How do I know this? I've been doing this for a number of years. Many of our members will not install signs in the city of Portland due to exactly what I'm talking about. To maintain a 32 square foot threshold for design review of signs is in direct conflict with the summary of proposal statement, page 5, DOZA proposed draft volume 1, which states require a higher level of review for larger projects and a lower level of review or exemption for smaller projects and alterations, which makes total sense to me. And with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and appreciate your consideration of our recommendation. Thank you.
Next up, we have Jonathan Greenwood.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Greenwood. Hello, Mayor and Council. I'd like to start by saying I'm in support of DOZA and Portland Neighbors Welcome suggestions. DOZA allows more buildings with housing to move forward by earning design standard points based on clear criteria. DOZA also makes it easier to use the Type 2 review by staff if they choose the discretionary design review path. While not as definite as the objective design standards, Type 2 avoids the public hearings at the Design Commission required by Type 3 review. Both the upgraded design standards and Type 2 staff review can reduce slowdowns and costs in building housing, making it more likely that new needed housing will be built. Building denser mixed-use housing in neighborhoods where there's more transit and other infrastructure is good for the planet and good for the people who live here. DOZA will allow taller buildings to go through a simpler process for approval to make housing easier to build in places like Slabtown, Hollywood, and Kearns. We should not limit design advice request meetings to one per We should limit design advice request meetings to one per project. By doing this, we will eliminate months of review time, which holds back needed housing from being built. Council can improve DOZA by expanding type 2 review option to each affordable housing project approved by the Housing Bureau, not just developments receiving city dollars. Also use type 2 review for buildings up to 75 feet that are using the inclusionary housing height bonus. This will create more affordable housing than requiring the more draconian type 3 review. The Design Commission should always be informed by affordability by requiring one member with experience living in, designing, or developing affordable housing to be part of the approval process. Finally, we should not double design standard points required for buildings between 55 and 75 feet tall. Council should oppose wealthy neighborhoods' privately developed Main Street guidelines that make it harder to add housing in neighborhoods and corridors. These places are screaming for dense housing without requiring restrictive process for approval. I oppose excessive, overly complicated character statements if they in effect become rezonings or restrict height, FAR, or massing, or hyperlocal design manuals that can stop or tie up development. This is essentially aiming at stopping projects in our most needed areas. Thank you so very much for your time. Have a good day.
Next up, we have Mary Vogel.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler. My name is Mary Vogel. I support the proposed DOZA amendment. As a Congress for the New Urbanism accredited professional, I am certainly concerned about the design of our neighborhoods. My Women Business Enterprise Plan Green has long been focused on climate justice principles as well as excellent urban design. The proposed DOZA will bring greater climate resiliency to communities by bringing greater certainty to developers who meet the design standards. I also support the amendments proposed by affordable housing developers. I waited with great anticipation over several years for Proud Ground to live up to its potential and offer multifamily housing opportunities. When they partnered with my favorite developer, Gina Woolley, and one of my favorite architecture firms, Carlton Hart, on the proposed 5020 North Interstate development, I was ecstatic. However, they were forced into a contentious design commission review by the president of the Overlook Neighborhood Association, who decided to be a stickler for the very recent change to the zoning code, putting Interstate Avenue into the de-overlay zone. He was insistent on getting an active use at the corner of the interstate in Alberta, although that location makes little sense for an active use, as the MAX train going by without stopping for several blocks it prevents it from being a desirable major intersection for most businesses, as it is not a four-way corner. Mine was one of the least impressive testimonies before the Design Commission that day, as so many leaders of the Black community testified in favor of this project. It made no difference, as commissioners felt constrained to vote on what the very recent new regulations said. As you heard from Diane Lynn, Proud Ground was forced into redesign, could not make it pencil, and ultimately lost the project. Please pass DOZA with the amendments proposed by the affordable housing developers. By the way, I appreciate the closed captioning, but it has been very slow today, very incomplete, and very difficult to understand. I wish I could have understood more testimonies today, but I have a profound hearing loss. Thank you.
Next up, we have Eric Lindsay, Thomas Robinson, and Kate Widows.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
We hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks, Council, for having this. I just want to lend my voice to those who are urging you to pass DOZA. I particularly hope that you will improve DOZA by putting all of the regulated affordable units that it would apply to into the type 2 review option. I really think it's important to design it in such a way that maximizes the possibility of affordable housing units per building, but also makes it easy for affordable housing developers to feel confident that they're going to be able to build the buildings that they're dreaming of. I also, in addition to that specifically, I want to offer my support for all of the suggestions and minor amendments that have been made by Portland Neighbors Welcome and the affordable housing community. And just more generally, I would ask that when you guys are thinking about DOZA and any changes you're going to make to it, somebody else earlier spoke about kind of how we're thinking about values. And I think that from my perspective, I'd really ask that you emphasize objective versus subjective design criteria. And in so doing, I think you will maximize affordable housing outcomes over subjective aesthetics. And while there are certainly times when buildings get built that I don't like or other people don't like, and I understand why that feels bad, I just think when it comes down to it, the possibility to put more people who need housing in good housing in high opportunity neighborhoods is so obviously the greater value to me. And I hope that you will act on that value as well. Thank you so much for the time. Have a good afternoon.
Next up is Thomas Robinson.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Thomas Robinson, and I'm the founder of Lever Architecture. Just to respond to the last comment, I really believe that you can have great design and great affordable housing. You do not need to choose. And the reason I'm saying that is we were the architects and designers for the largest affordable project built in Portland in the last 50 years, the Louisa Flowers project. And we went through a type 3 design project, and it improved our project. It made it better, it made it more equitable, and it connected to the community. We've been through numerous type 3 design processes, and we've always found a way to make the project work for the commissioners, work for the city, and actually meet the budgets that we need to. It just requires a focus on design, and I'm super appreciative that this discussion is happening. I think everyone in Portland loves this city. They want to see it grow, and I don't think that you need to make the choice. I think you can support design review, you can support DOZA, but I have real concerns about what's been characterized as minor amendments to that document. 75-foot height exemption is a big deal, just in the way a 75-foot building is a big building. And I think that most of the projects we do, most of the housing, most of the market rate housing is below 75 feet and will not be impacted. It will be type 2 review. That is the majority of projects. But when you have these large projects, I urge you to allow for the public process to happen and to allow that design engagement to occur. So thank you. Really appreciate this discussion.
Thank you. Before you go off, Commissioner Hardesty had a comment or a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thank you, Thomas, for your testimony. My question is, so what do you say to organizations like Proud Ground or Human Solutions and others who say these delays actually create missed opportunities to increase the stock of housing that people can afford to live in?
You know, I think it's a really great question. Honestly, in our situations and in the designs that we've worked with, we've always been able to find a creative solution. And where we've actually fallen down, where we've really had the issues are on the permitting side, the STC side. So I think that this issue about design review being the obstacle, to me, is maybe not a holistic sort of focus. It's really thinking about the whole process. How do we speed up the permitting process as a whole? Design review just happens in the beginning. We've always found creative ways to get through design review.
I appreciate that, but I think there's a huge difference between for-profit developers and nonprofit housing developers. There's a difference between both the resources they have access to and a tenuous nature of the finance agreements that they put together. So I don't think that we're comparing the same items.
Yeah, I respect that. What I'm saying is we're doing some of the largest affordable housing projects in Portland, and we've also done market rate projects. So what I'm saying is, and most of those affordable projects are below 75 feet. And I think that I think design is an equity issue. We really want the affordable housing projects we design, or I think every architect wants to be as attractive as anything that's market rate. And I think design review can play a role in that. So I think that there are real challenges, but what I'm saying is not that it's really for me the 75-foot height issue, Commissioner Hardesty. It's not about type 3 versus type 2. I think if you're, it's really when you get to that size building. That's really the point I'm making. If I hope to be clear about that.
No, thank you, Thomas. No, that's very helpful because I share some concerns about 75 feet as well. But I'm really trying to focus in on how do we expand as quickly as possible the opportunities for real affordable housing, because 80% is not affordable. And so if we're talking 60% and below, that gets closer to an affordable housing rate. And we don't need anything slowing it down in the process. And let me just say that speeding it up doesn't also mean that we're expecting buildings that won't be excellent buildings made of good quality and good design. It just means that we know that we need to speed up that process. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Next up, we have Kate Widows.
Hi, can you hear?
We hear you.
Looks like, oh, there she is. Kate, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, am I back?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Greetings to the mayor and commissioners and staff. My name is Kate Widows, and I'm a contributor of a group called PDX Neon. We're a local advocacy group dedicated to protecting and preserving an often overlooked treasure in Portland's landscape, the historic neon sign. Now, every city has its own unique collection of historic neon signs, and Portland is no exception. These glowing gems become nothing less than irreplaceable cultural icons and are essential elements in the visual identity of our city. Think of the Alibi Lounge's fiery red lettering, or Portland Outdoor Store's cowboy on a horse. How about Chin's Kitchen's dumpling eater in Hollywood? These and scores of other beautiful signs, which are unique to Portland alone, are known and cherished by Portlanders, tourists, and sign lovers everywhere. Signs like this disappear from the American landscape every single day. We need to act now to protect these important works of folk art before they're gone forever. The changes we're proposing for the DOZA recommendations document will not only help prevent Portland's beautiful neon signs from being tossed in a dumpster, but will also support the work of local, highly skilled craftspeople in our city who make, repair, and restore these one-of-a-kind signs by hand every day. Now, the DOZA recommendations make mention of neon on page 32 of volume 3, suggesting that adherence to the guidelines, quote, maintain a site's uniqueness by repurposing architectural elements such as sculptural neon signage and character-defining canopies, unquote. So my suggestions are as follows. 1, the term sculptural is too specific. Please update the language in this section to include possibly something like, quote, historic and or noteworthy neon signage. Most of Portland's neon signs aren't necessarily sculptural or designed to fit with a building's architecture. 2, please include additional examples of neon signs in the citywide design guidelines in order to further illustrate the need for protecting a variety of signs. This potential showcasing of neon, as is done on page 32, will provide a quick visual reference so that users reviewing the developments across the city will be more inclined to protect and preserve important and/or historic neon signs. 3, in the design standards section of the document, please add additional standards requiring the preservation of historic neon signs, as well as encouragement for the creation of new neon signs, as currently there is no mention of neon signage in this section. 4, please support the adoption of a neon sign historic resource survey as part of the upcoming Historic Resources Code project. This survey will lead to the development of much needed new options for protecting historic neon signs from demolition. Additionally, in regards to the Historic Resources Code project, my last suggestion is that you add support for assigning landmark designation to Portland's most important signs. Now, I appreciate the time you've taken to make improvements to the zoning code, and thank you so much for considering our proposed changes. I hope you agree that we need to act now to protect Portland's beautiful neon works of art before it's too late, and that adjusting the zoning codes is an excellent vehicle to achieve these protections. Thank you so much for your time.
Next up, we have Stephen Judkins, Peggy Moretti, and Sean Bolden.
Hi there. Can you hear me? It's national in scale and affects the poorest citizens. Address the crisis, which is national in scale and affects the poorest citizens the most. It's very important progress that we need to defend. I feel if we don't limit opportunities to cynically and delay and block new housing, RIP's impact will be greatly blunted and will build less, more expensive housing for fewer people. The problem is not design review. The problem that, by law, design review can be appealed and very often will be appealed. The appeal process is where the problem happens. I'd like to circle back and point out what's gone on in this hearing. Speakers representing some of the wealthiest and most exclusive neighborhoods in the city have filibustered, speaking many minutes over their allotted limits in order to delay and hopefully silence pro-housing voices. I'm lucky I was able to speak, but if I had another 5-minute speaker, I probably wouldn't have been able to, and the balance of testimony would be tilted further towards the NIMBYs. The same thing will happen if there is a broad right to appeal. The wealthiest and most connected people in the city will regularly right to appeal. The wealthiest and most connected people in the city will regularly use their privilege and the fancy lawyers they can afford to cynically delay and block every development they can. Many will still be constructed, some will not, and renters and prospective home buyers will suffer. In conclusion, please pass DOZA and improve it by following Portland Neighborhood Welcome recommendations. Thank you.
Next up is Peggy Moretti.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Peggy Moretti, representing Restore Oregon. Restore Oregon supports many aspects of DOZA and really are grateful for all the hard work that went into it. Commissioner Nick Fish once stated, everyone deserves a well-designed city. And in a city that touts its commitment to equity and inclusion, we would add that everyone deserves to have a voice in shaping their community, which is, after all, an extension of their home. That degree of community engagement has not yet been achieved. Restore Oregon joins many of Portland's neighborhood associations in supporting PDX Main Street's top 5 DOZA design recommendations. And it's really unfortunate they've been so divisively and ignorantly mischaracterized here today. We'd like to emphasize 3 points. 1, commit funding now to the development and adoption of character statements for D overlay areas, so we don't lose the context-specific themes and elements that make each neighborhood center unique and that are under threat today. The city cannot stop the erosion of our cultural heritage until it identifies it through robust community outreach and prioritizes its retention. For example, supplemental guidelines are critical to elevating themes from the Asian American community within the Jade District, and as a way to empower and engage communities such as St. John's, Midway, or the Heart of Foster. This effort cannot wait 10 years. Council must instruct BPS to present a work plan with performance deadlines for completing this work. 2, set the threshold for triggering design review at 45 feet or over 4 stories. Most of the outer north and east side commercial centers consist of 3- and 4-story buildings, and construction of dramatically taller buildings requires discretionary review to ensure that they do respond to the surrounding character. The main reason often cited for increasing the threshold is lack of predictability in the development process. But the height and FAR is entitled, and so that completely undercuts this concern. And we have no examples of the Design Commission denying a development request reviewed under discretionary design guidelines. Most importantly, discretionary review provides a forum for community members to meaningfully engage and creates positive place-based outcomes, as so many folks in the design community have said. Our third point is to impose demolition review for those Main Street areas that are vulnerable to demolition, which is an inevitable outcome of the zoned height increases. In addition to erasing our heritage, demolition significantly set back Portland's goals for reducing emissions. Attached to our testimony submitted via the MAPS app is the summary of findings from Eco Northwest, that the benefit of restoring and reusing a 10,000 square foot commercial building versus its demolition and replacement by a 20,000 square foot building equates to reducing CO2 emissions by 1,383 metric tons. That's the equivalent of taking over 1,000 cars off the road for an entire year. So the environmental impact of demolition, which is related to all of this, is significant. The soul of Portland is the wonderful diversity and character of her neighborhoods, and this could be erased if we get it wrong. Equity and access requires prioritizing context-appropriate design that embraces the cultural, historic, and natural features that matter to each community. And admittedly, this will require additional effort, but the impact and the legacy will literally outlive us all. Thank you.
Next up, we have Sean Bolden.
Hi, Mayor and Commissioners, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and submit my testimony. Wanted to bring this from a different perspective as well, without shaming and blaming. I am a former resident of Houston, Texas, where they have no zoning laws or design review commission. My position is to keep the DAR for affordable housing. You cannot boil everything down to just a algorithm where you're just creating check boxes for people to check off and everything is fine. You have to have individuals to be a part of it and hear their voices. If you drown out the voices, it's going to end up being a slippery slope for hearing individuals in future projects. Here's some bullet points that I would like everybody to kind of observe and understand. If you have developers coming in that do not understand the social structures, values, aesthetics, and behaviors behind them, they tend to bring their own biases to the table that only kind of looks at their values and aesthetics in their culture. Public discourse, sure, can be a place that can be a Trojan horse for people to slide in and use it as a malicious intent, or use the tool as a malicious intent, but that cannot be your sole reason for stripping this away from the people. That I think, in my opinion, you need to review and revise before you strip it completely away, because once it leaves, it's hard to bring it back. And we've seen that with our global politics and local politics. It takes a while for these things to happen. There's no one size fits all solution. So the standards that you come up with will continuously evolve. So instead of there being a zero-sum game, I believe that you need to have a hybrid of the two. Again, stripping it completely out, I don't think actually helps solve anything. I think you need to strip something else out in order to reduce the time. But that's the end of my time, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Next up, we have Kirsten Leising, Sherry Gilovich, and David Scholheimer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Kirsten Leising, and I'm the first of 4 speakers from the Selwood Moreland Improvement League, better known as SMILE. In Selwood Moreland, we support increased density, reducing building costs, and more affordable housing. In our very desirable neighborhood has had 1,200 units built in the past 6 years. an increase of 20% with no appeals. Selwood Moreland has about 4 miles of D overlay corridors, perhaps more than any other neighborhood in Portland, and change is occurring quickly. Most new development in our neighborhood in Portland uses design standards, and that's why we focus on those. Standards can reduce cost and streamline projects, but do not provide a coherent vision for neighborhood development. We want to retain and improve livability while the neighborhood evolves with new infill and redevelopment. By definition, when design standards are used, there's no opportunity in new developments for community input or design review by our knowledgeable city staff, and no requirements for buildings near each other to complement each other. The DOZA design standards fail to build on context, which is supposed to be a fundamental tenet of DOZA. We want DOZA to incorporate the community development Selwood Moreland Main Street design guidelines primarily as an optional design standard. We believe this will lead to a more coherent vision for growth. Next, Sherry Gilovich will go into the process and content of our community guidelines. Thank you so much.
Hello?
Sherry?
Yes, this is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is Sherry Gilovich with SMILE. In 2019, the SMILE Neighborhood Association started a project to learn about and develop design guidelines after fully engaging area residents and businesses, including the Selwood Moreland Business Alliance. With steady development over the past 6 years, the community wanted to help local design and livability of the area while the neighborhood grows. With a consultant team, we held several public meetings and a guided walking tour. We manned tables outside the local grocery store and farmers market to talk with people about this project. In all, about 150 people participated in events and completed 80 surveys on community goals and design priorities. These efforts informed selection of the community guidelines documented in the Selwood Moreland Main Street Design Guidelines document. Our 17 guidelines address building form, Main Street facades, and pedestrian amenities. The building form ideas include upper floor step backs or facades designed with a base, middle, top. Other features are simply articulation of a roof line or roofline cornice inspired by a cornice on a nearby existing building. Some guidelines focus on individual features such as window size and alignment, balconies, and pedestrian-friendly corner entries called chamfered entries. Features that relate to the Main Street facade are recessed windows and entries, arched windows and entries, clear-story windows, storefront display windows, and adorning exposed building sides. It's important to stress that the community guidelines do not in any way circumvent city goals for diverse, sustainable, and equitable development. Rather, the guidelines promote community-supported design options for developers to create livable neighborhoods. We seek to add just some of the Selwood Moreland Main Street Design Guidelines into the DOZA design standards. David Schultz will next explain how they could be implemented in DOZA. Thank you.
Next up is Rocky Johnson.
No, David Schulhammer is up next.
Oh, I'm sorry, David.
Thank you. I am David Schulhammer with SMILE. There are 2 ways you can implement the Selwood Moreland Main Street Design Guidelines that Sherry just described. First, the zoning code includes a design district for Selwood Moreland, which presently uses the Citywide Community Design Standards. DOZA proposes to eliminate the district, but it could be retained and include the community guidelines. A second approach is to add an optional design standard that awards points for one or more of the following: recessed symmetric windows that are human scaled, clear story windows, base, middle, top, pedestrian friendly corner entrance, extended street facing balconies, step back design, and a Main Street bundle bonus for using 4 of these design features. Recall that DOZA already has 45 optional standards for developers to choose from to earn points, like elective classes in school. So this would add 1 more elective for developers to choose from. To support the vitality and attractiveness of neighborhood commercial centers, one of these features should be required in the existing center's Main Street overlay zone. This M overlay applies to a small part of the design overlay where neighborhood centers have continuous areas of shops and services. DOZA already has 17 required standards, so this would be a minor addition in a small part of the D overlay with 6 ways to be satisfied. This would ensure that new buildings in the M overlay have at least one Main Street design feature and satisfy DOZA's goal of building to context. To reduce building costs, which we want to do, the recessed window and extended balcony standards should satisfy articulation requirements in all zones throughout the city. These requirements are intended to break up building facades. Either recessed windows or extended balconies would achieve this, simplify construction, and allow stacked floor plates and eliminate cantilevers. Details are in our written testimony. Rocky Johnson will next explain the benefits of our proposals.
Next up, we have Rocky Johnson. Rocky, are you able to unmute?
Oh, here I am. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Rocky Johnson, I am also a SMILE, and I will be brief, just kind of summarize, given this has been a long afternoon of testimony. All of our recommended design guideline options will encourage building diversity, increase solar and pedestrian access, and can be incorporated in new construction without increasing building and housing costs. In short, they will continue to allow us to accommodate increased residential density and diversity while maintaining the livability of our neighborhood and the city of Portland. So basically, we don't see what we are recommending is in any way going to make it more difficult to construct affordable housing. We see it as more complementary to that. And in fact, if we work with those developers, we can have better designs and better housing for all people that seek to live within our neighborhood. Thank you.
Next up, we have Matt Kelly, Brian Hoop, and Patrick Hilton.
Hi, my name is Matt Kelly. I'm a city employee, but the views I'm sharing are my own, and I'm using personal time to speak with you today. I support the DOZA proposal and encourage you to adopt the changes proposed by Portland Neighbors Welcome. Late last year, I was fortunate to be able to just barely afford to buy a small home in inner Southeast Portland, due in part to some financial help from my wife's parents. And I love my neighborhood. There's a huge variety of buildings. There's a lot of apartment buildings. And most of the buildings around me never went through design review of any kind. So are some of those buildings in my neighborhood ugly? Some people would say so. So how should buildings look? That's essentially what we're talking about with DOZA. And one word I've heard a lot today is that buildings should be contextual. What is contextual? There's a lot of flowery language we use to try to articulate this idea, a lot of words, but at the end of the day, what we mean by contextual is subjective. We can talk about specific building elements like cornices and setbacks and windows, insets, and so on, but at the end of the day, it's subjective. So here are some of the phrases I've heard in testimony today and in the privately developed PDX Main Street guidelines. Buildings should have a, quote, coherent vision for the inhabitants. Buildings should, quote, create places that have a harmonious marriage of diversity and unity. Buildings should have, quote, human scale, proportion, and rhythm. Buildings should, quote, express both their own unique identities while being in harmony with neighbors. Do the buildings in my neighborhood do any of these things? Do they have good proportion and rhythm? I don't know. What I do know is that when I look outside my window, I see people living in their cars. There's people living in their cars. So there's an urgent need for good quality housing. And I urge city commissioners to keep that top of mind and stay grounded in that reality. I encourage you to support DOZA and the Portland Neighbors Welcome changes so we can facilitate good quality housing in our city. housing that's well built and that we can be proud of, and housing that we need. Thank you.
So,
yeah.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Brian Hoop. I serve as Executive Director of Housing Oregon, a statewide membership-based association of affordable housing nonprofits committed to serving and supporting low-income Oregonians across the housing needs spectrum. Our Portland Metro Policy Council, which endorsed our submitted comments, includes groups including Human Solutions, Hacienda CDC, Rose CDC, Central City Concern, and about 20 other local organizations. I want to leave you with one overriding message today from the community of affordable housing providers. Please make clear, flexible, and objective design standards an option for as many projects as possible. We join the Planning and Sustainability Commission in Portland Neighbors Welcome in supporting this option for buildings with a D overlay that are up to 75 feet tall. Please don't misunderstand our support for clear, objective, and flexible design standards. Our members are fine with being held to the same design standard as market rate developers. Mandatory design details can add costs, but those are relatively manageable. However, there is a different ever-present risk to the existence of every affordable home our members try to create. It is delay. Overlapping deadlines and time-limited financing options make affordable projects even more vulnerable to delay and uncertainty than market rate projects. Through no fault of the Design Commission, any discretionary process makes projects far more vulnerable to the risk of a delay. An appeal to LUBA means hundreds of hours of work by architects and can delay a project months to a year. That's even if one of our members wins on every issue. Experience has taught us that in neighborhoods with design review, it takes only relatively few critics of a project to force such a process. For our members, this functions as a major deterrent to creating affordable homes in some neighborhoods, even though a healthy city should have affordable homes in each neighborhood. Because affordable projects are uniquely vulnerable to obstructive appeals, we also echo the Portland Neighbors Welcome recommendation to give all Housing Bureau certified affordable housing projects the option of a Type 2 staff review if they are going through the discretionary review process. We don't want affordable projects to have an incentive to build shorter to avoid frivolous appeals. And finally, we oppose any measures that could evolve into neighborhood-specific design rules. Our members are working hard to help Portland build the affordable housing we need, and please don't make it harder for them to do that. Thank you.
Next up is Patrick Hilton. Patrick, are you able to unmute? Mayor, I see that Patrick is on the call, but I don't know that. Oh, it looks like he might be trying to call in. Let's see here.
Keelan, while he's trying to call in, can you give us some indication of a time check?
Sure. I'm showing 9 testifiers remain.
Very good.
Maybe we can go to the next person while
Go to the next person and we'll try and get Patrick in later.
Yeah, troubleshoot. Okay. Next up we have Adam Wilson.
Hi, yes, my name is Adam Wilson with the Montevilla Neighborhood Association. I'm the land use chair. Montevilla would like to Montevilla would like to bring up the topic of expanding the D overlay and M overlay and understanding the extents of those overlays. We currently feel underserved by the city as far as an oversight to the design that goes into the neighborhood and an understanding of the identity of our neighborhood. The Main Street on Stark has an M overlay, which does have some minor criteria, but we would like to expand that and have a better understanding of what that means for those buildings that have historic significance to the neighborhood, specifically in relationship to the light rail that once existed there. There's also an understanding that 82nd is a huge corridor running through our neighborhood, and we understand that it's not owned by the city, but the buildings that are put on that corridor may have the potential to be influenced by the city. And so that is one corridor we have interest in discussing a D overlay or some type of overlay. And so the future projects that are discussed at the tail end of the proposal talk about expanding, but I think the understanding of where those expansions should go beyond the main street and explore other scales within our city, specifically the different corridors throughout Montevilla. We have 3 different scales that we're dealing with. So our key concern is having some type of communication with the city over time to develop these design overlays and understand how we can maintain some identity of Montevilla and also respect the urgency of neighborhoods and the underserved low-income housing that really needs to be addressed in this city. So we support DOZA, but we would like to at least have an acknowledgement of expanding those design overlays within our neighborhoods and starting that conversation in the future. Thank you.
Okay, let's try Patrick Hilton again. Okay, I'll call the next 3: Sean Sweat, John Zarnecki, and Michelle Planbeck.
Hi there, thank you. This is Sean Sweat. I just have to start by saying, in all seriousness, that I really love neon signs. So, I mean, their testimony was a little over my head, but whatever the neon lobby wants, please give it to them. But neon wasn't really part of my game plan here. So let me get back on track. I live in the Pearl, and I value the Design Commission. I don't think design review is a problem at all. But I've sadly seen the appeals process weaponized to try to stop good projects in my neighborhood, projects that would have both furthered Portland's climate goals and increased our housing supply. I think it's really important that you eliminate this path for just a few well-funded people to torpedo good projects. Ideally, we could just make Design Commission decisions final. That would be my first choice because I trust the Design Commission. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the state law requires a city to allow appeals. So the other option is to reduce how many projects have to go to the Design Commission in the first place by using the objective and predictable design standards in DOZA, allowing more projects to build by right and to avoid the minefield of that appeals process. So maybe that means we add a little more stringency to the standards with regard to materials or something like that people often want to complain about. But as long as we can allow more projects to proceed by right and avoid that appeals process, I think there's value in that. So, I mean, we badly need more housing, and defining this predictable, objective development path for projects, it's going to have a big impact on who can afford Portland in 5 or 6 years. So please just prevent the weaponization of our design review process, not the process really, but about, the appeals process, so that these good projects can move through. And I think you can accomplish that by just allowing more buildings to build by right. Thank you.
Next up, we have John Zarnecki. John, are you able to unmute? Why don't we go to the next person and we'll come back to John. Michelle Planbeck.
Hi, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for staying after 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. My name is Michelle Planbeck, and I am here today registered as a representative of Oregon Smart Growth, a group of civically minded, responsible developers, investors, and allied industries. Oregon Smart Growth has shared feedback throughout the DOZA.
Michelle, you may have muted.
Now I'm on. Can you hear me again?
Now we can.
Okay. Oregon Smart Growth has shared feedback throughout the DOZA project, including support for the alignment of both the standards and guidelines around the tenets of the new design overlay purpose statement: context, public realm, and quality. We also appreciate that some of our concerns have been addressed, including removing the D overlay from single dwelling zoned properties, dropping the creation of character building designations, and exempting facade and rooftop alterations of particular types. We also strongly opposed a proposal to grant the Design Commission the right to reduce proposed FAR or height. We appreciate the newer clarification that the design review process cannot require a reduction in FAR or height of the project if they are allowed within the zone. We also appreciate and support the PSC's change to allow buildings up to 75 feet in height to utilize the design standards objective track. However, there are two significant issues that need to be addressed in the recommended draft prior to adoption. Oregon Smart Growth agrees that design advice requests should remain voluntary, but applicants should be allowed to utilize more than one at their discretion and cost. The recommended draft limits the number of DARs to one per review unless there are multiple buildings on the site. Projects can make more efficient use of the of the design review stage by utilizing a second DAR when needed. Second, Oregon Smart Growth appreciates the intended flexibility of this design standards menu approach, but the point system is still too directive with arbitrary point values. Instead of assigning point values to menu items, Oregon Smart Growth urges council to consider a menu of items of equal weight organized in a way that developers are asked to choose a specified number of options. For example, 3 or 5 options in category driven by site and design considerations. In addition to this testimony, Oregon Smart Growth is also signatory to the letter submitted by Portland Neighbors Welcome. Thank you for your time today.
John, were you able to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks very much. I'm John Zarnicki. I'm an architect with practice downtown. I'm also a past chair of the Landmarks Commission and a longtime affordable housing advocate. I'm testifying today in support of the proposed of the DOZA amendments and request that you adjust the proposal to better meet the benefits of design, of the tenets of design. 1, include at least one position for an architect on the design commission, as well as one position with a historic preservation background on the design commission. The position, the architect seat will complete a typical collaborative team of urban design, landscape design, and architecture, thereby being able to provide the applicant and ensure with input and ensure the possibility of consistent message to the community. The position for historic preservation background, with the input from varied cultural viewpoints and other proposed seats comprising a dynamic and useful commission, could serve the city holistically and inclusively, particularly given the proposal to expand and adjust the sources of cultural references for design. Number 2, resolve possible conflicts between zoning density and livable neighborhoods. The intention to provide for complete neighborhoods as defined in the 2035 comprehensive plan. I'm going to read this briefly. It's just a couple sentences. A complete neighborhood is a neighborhood where people have safe and convenient access to the goods and services needed in daily life, which include a variety of housing options, grocery stores and other commercial services, high quality public schools and parks. Complete neighborhoods are also easily accessible by foot, wheelchair, bike, and transit for all people of ages and abilities. I think I'm just going to go back to number 3 and come back to number 2. Well, actually, the main number 3, remove the exception for design review as a bonus for providing affordable housing. Structures not having the benefit of adequate design review will be noticeable in a context of otherwise reviewed projects. They will run counter to the benefits of pre-bonus code limits and socially mark their residents based on perceived economic status. So back for a moment to the complete neighborhood. I support the process of Main Street standards, believing that they have the possibility of increasing livability, by developing the public realm in such a way that increases the quality of the context in which the neighborhood operates, and adds to the completeness of the neighborhood. Thanks very much for your stewardship, for your forward thinking on behalf of us all.
Next up, we have Madeline Hotchkiss, Patrick Hilton, and Tony Bernal.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I hope so. My name is Madeline Hotchkiss. I am speaking in full support of the DOZA to simplify the design review process and the amendments proposed by Portland Neighbors Welcome. Simplifying the design process will help bring more housing to high opportunity areas as encouraged by Portland's anti-displacement plan. Portland Neighbors Welcome's amendments will remove roadblocks for much needed inclusionary and affordable housing projects. Please reject the hyper-local design requirements pushed by wealthy neighborhoods. These decrease economic diversity in our communities and lend themselves to bias. Staying true to our commitments to diversity and equity means supporting housing in high opportunity areas, not setting up roadblocks. Thank you.
Next up, we have Patrick Hilton.
I keep getting muted, so if you don't hear me, do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear
Hello?
you.
You can't hear me?
We hear you.
Okay. Oy, okay. All right, my name is Patrick. I live on 82nd and Fremont Avenue. I am a low-income renter of an older home. I am in favor of the recommendations made by PDX Main Street's culturally sensitive Main Street guidelines, affordability design standards, Main Street standards, equitable design review, demolition review, sustainability scorecard. You guys say city for the people. That sounds good, but what does that mean when only the city hall staff is involved in any decisions that will tear down existing affordable rental housing and local businesses to make way for new 7-story buildings? Your policies are not leading to equity. We have so many empty apartments now. Why aren't these being used as affordable housing? These zoning rules you create put no pressure on corporate apartment companies that build but fail to ever fill these apartments. I don't understand the desire to demolish and rebuild Alberta Arts District and other corridors that define Portland's identity to the world as a global city that is beautiful and worth visiting. Alberta and other vintage corridors are unique, charming, well-functioning districts because the historic buildings were created and handcrafted at a human scale with knowledge and practices that were lost after the automobile and modernist movements changed human habitats forever. Artists and local community members put in blood, sweat, and tears for decades to create ecosystems that are pedestrian friendly and serve as destination for tourists and local residents to experience the best that Portland has to offer. These areas are the fertile ground of our newest innovative business ideas. New apartment companies do not offer this, or complexes, new apartment complexes do not offer this. Our economy depends on these corridors to keep Portland a tourist and film TV premier location. This adds hundreds of millions of dollars to the economy each year. So why displace and replace these vibrant ecosystems with Wall Street investor-driven monotone districts of 7-story corporate apartment complexes that will shade out the sun at all times of the day, year-round? This will kill the vital, authentic, human-scaled places and will result in vertical suburbia. You talk of nature, but where exactly will nature go? In a metal flower pot in front of the locked apartment door? When you extract the value that businesses and community members put in throughout the decades for the common good and give that value to developers, you violate what a city is. You turn it into a vertical suburb. It is a corporate-built habitat that isn't built in the people's best interest. Why take away the best districts we have when we have many auto-centric, non-historic corridors that are derelict, zero-density, and prime areas for redevelopment? 82nd Avenue, Powell, 122nd, the list goes on. Focus on making these auto-centric areas into pedestrian, human-scaled places infused with well-designed affordable housing that families can own, not rent for the rest of their lives. The reason is that developers will make the most profit by replacing the vibrant districts we have with vertical suburbia. High opportunity means highest profit areas. Greed guides where the development happens. So at the end of this urban renewal process will be a city of horizontal corporate suburbia and vertical corporate suburbia. I expect more innovation from you. You are trading the treasures of our city for buildings that will give you more tax money and short-term profits to developers, but will change these areas forever. 75 feet is not human scale. These buildings will turn charming neighborhoods into dull shadow districts. In the past 10 years, dozens and dozens of dull new apartment complexes have been constructed. They have many vacancies. A vast majority of these will remain empty for many years because corporations will not lower rents. The working class depend on these vital districts. Alberta, Hawthorne, Belmont, Montevilla for service industry jobs and local shops and restaurants in these experienced areas, but also the adjacent areas. Innovation can add affordable housing to these districts while keeping them vibrant. And if you guys are so concerned about affordability, then why are you allowing new one-story global brands to redevelop properties with no housing on these sites? You're planning a one-story CVS with a large parking lot at Hawthorne and Grant, at least 7 huge storage unit facilities that have zero density in these DOZA areas. Many of them surrounded by people in tents while their stuff has climate-controlled space. A rebuilt Taco Bell that takes up a whole city block in Lloyd Center, built a few years ago. That list goes on and on. I don't believe that you nor the lobbyists in favor of this change care about affordable housing when I see you require nothing from global corporations as they redevelop inner Portland with no density and single-story suburban-style developments with no effort from you to require affordable housing above these corporate brands, like the CVS. And our city has half-empty luxury apartment buildings while affordable old houses, house rentals, and retail buildings are leveled or boarded up to make way for more dull, cheap luxury apartment buildings. Stop letting corporations waste land. Stop displacing those of us that are low income and live in old houses and local businesses in old buildings and historic corridors. Innovate. We can have vibrant main streets and affordable housing. This is not a zero-sum game. This is urban renewal with new marketing lingo. Thank you.
Next up, we have Tony Bernal.
Good evening. My name is Tony Bernal, and I am the Senior Director of Public Policy and Funding for Transition Projects, an organization that helps people end their homelessness. Design review is a collaborative process that has long-term benefits for the building occupants in the neighborhoods they become a part of. Households with little money deserve to be afforded the rights to live in buildings that benefit from the same level of public discourse and discussion that informs, improves, and validates the design of all other buildings in the neighborhood. Community engagement and conversation with design review protects affordable housing developers from NIMBY appeals. In spring of 2020, when the pandemic was setting in, we opened Argyle Gardens, 72 units of very low income housing in the Kenton neighborhood. In addition to consulting with the neighborhood about design, we participated voluntarily in a design advice request process with the Design Commission. The feedback that we received was invaluable for informing our project, particularly the Design Commission's advice on how some of our exterior spaces interacted with the neighborhood. I would encourage you to continue to support the Design Commission and to consider making design advice requests free to affordable housing developers. Thank you for this opportunity and have a great evening.
Next up, we have Leslie Cliff, Ted Labby, and Nancy Chapin.
Hi, this is Leslie. I'd like to give you a perspective from that of an architect. In my 17 years as a project manager at Bora Architects, I've guided numerous projects through the design review process. I actually just submitted an affordable housing project for design advice this week. I have 3 comments I'd like to share with you. On the question of timeline, my experience is design review is not the process that holds up a project. It coincides with the typical design phases of a project. The real problem is the permit review timelines. The 9 months it took for the city to finally issue a permit for our Lincoln High School project was simply unacceptable. So if you want to fix timelines, let's work on the permitting process. The second comment is an issue of equity. I feel by removing affordable housing from the design review process, it implies that these projects can just be good enough and somehow not come under the review of a higher design idea. Everyone deserves consideration for their neighborhood and building and I fear without some kind of public scrutiny, developers, truthfully, and their architects could and have cut corners, creating really marginal buildings. Every development should carefully consider the lasting impact of a building on its community and its residents, no matter their income. Lastly, I believe in a public process. As someone who has owned a house 1 block off of Division for the last 28 years, I've witnessed early development that literally turned its back to the street and contributed nothing to the public realm. Eliminating design review will result in pushing projects through behind closed doors with no opportunity for neighborhood input or a public hearing, and it's really a disservice to our communities. I urge you to retain the design review process. Thank you.
Next up, we have Ted Labby.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Ryan, Rubio. My name is Ted Labby. I'm Executive Director with the Urban Green Spaces Institute, and we work across the Portland, Vancouver metro region to integrate green spaces with the built environment. I want to encourage you tonight to move forward with the recommended draft DOZA standards. I think the staff, Planning and Sustainability Commission, have put a lot of hard work into this, including also the Design Commission. And I think it represents an important step forward for the city. The DOZA is an important opportunity to more thoughtfully integrate nature into our built environment across the city's diverse commercial centers. And there is urgency to this work as the effects of climate change are already manifesting in our community. In the past, the design review process is focused more on building appearance and massing, and to some extent has neglected climate change mitigation and adaptation. That's why I am a big proponent of the proposal before you to add expertise to the Design Commission for someone with a natural resources background and for landscape architects, allowing landscape architects to serve, and sustainable building experts. And I know you haven't had too many folks talk about that tonight. I think that's a really important reform for the Design Commission, and I'm here to support that. I'll just say that I think previous commenters talked about avenues to kind of ease the path for affordable housing developers. I would support a lot of those ideas as well. I'm not going to talk about those now, but a lot of those ideas I think are worthy of your attention. So thanks very much. Thanks for your thoughtful consideration of the DOZA standards, and thank you. Good night.
Next up, we have Nancy Chapin, followed by Adam Wilson.
Well, good evening, y'all. It's good to see you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. You know, I was born here, and I've lived here for the last 37 years. And Portland is a draw in the country. Portland's historic districts are a draw. I really want us not to create a city that 40 years from now is not that historic and beautiful business district draw. Currently, I live in the Brentwood Darlington neighborhood. I do own my house. I'm me in the bank. I'm not wealthy. You know, I am, I kind of, this thing about we wealthy people that want to have our business districts and our city look good and continue its historic feel in many areas bothers me. I'm also the president of the 82nd Avenue Business Association, and that certainly is an area as the center of the city now that needs to have more attention paid to it and needs to have more housing for sure, with half the population being to the east of it and half to the west. We need to start paying attention to the 82nd Avenue area. I work with Hawthorne Boulevard, I do, but those businesses there, the businesses in this community support this city. They pay taxes. They deserve to be taken care of and not decimated by, you saw the picture of what we call the thumb building, the one on Hawthorne on 34th that's 5 stories taller than anything next to it and has no retail on the bottom. That's called context, folks. And you don't put in a 5-story building next to 5 one-story retail buildings and not put retail in the bottom. So when you create a system that allows that sort of thing to happen to our beautiful business districts, our beautiful pulls to people from our country to come to, you don't do anything you don't do Portland a favor. I know I'm your last speaker and I know you're tired and I'm tired. I have a Woodstock Community Business Association board meeting actually starting in 7 minutes. So I just want you to know that 55 feet is plenty for Hawthorne and Belmont. Please do design reviews over 40. Don't change that from the downtown when you're looking at our historic business districts. And I've gone over the time. Hope you all have a good evening. And it's good to have been sitting in with you on this entire afternoon. So I know you're ready to go, have a bite to eat and visit with your families. So good night.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Keelan, does that complete public testimony?
Yes, I made a mistake when I called Adam Wilson. He already testified, so we are complete. We're done.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your testimony. We've heard from everyone who is signed up to testify, so the oral testimony is closed. At this time, the written testimony is also closed. I'll now turn it back to BPS staff to share our next steps.
Hello, Mayor. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the testifiers. Mayor Whaley, we were going to suggest that we keep the written record open until Friday at 5 o'clock, if that's okay with the council.
That's okay with me, if that's okay with staff.
Yeah, we've just received, we received 40 pieces of testimony in the past 3 hours, so we don't want to cut it short.
I think that's reasonable. So to restate that then, the oral record is closed. Written testimony will be accepted until when on Friday?
5 p.m. on Friday, May 14th.
Perfect.
And we do have time reserved on the council agenda for May 26th. We have a 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. time slot reserved. So our thinking is that that's when the council members could introduce their amendments. We won't have time for the public to sign up to testify for those amendments or publish them ahead of time. So our thinking is that you could move the amendments at that time, but that the testimony for those amendments would be taken at a subsequent meeting, tentatively scheduled for June 10th, which is where we have another time penciled in on the council agenda.
Very good. Thank you. Does that complete our business for today, Ben?
I just want to assure the public that we will, once we have those amendments moved, we would also post them on the BPS website, and that you'll be receiving emails we'll send emails to all the testifiers and the people that we've been communicating with to let them know what the plan is.
Okay, and Stacey, I see you've got a comment as well.
I do. Thank you for letting me chime in. There was one other testifier that has emailed me saying that they are on the video and they are waiting to testify. And I'm not sure if Keelan has seen them. For David Keltner.
I don't see David on the call in the panelist.
Listed as not registered. Is that a phone number? Is it a phone?
We can open that line and ask if it's David. David, are you on the call? Yeah, I don't believe that's David.
Well, why don't we do this? Since the written record is still open, if David could submit his testimony as written. David, if you can hear me out there in the ether, my apologies. We definitely want to hear your testimony. If you could submit it in writing, we'll absolutely take it into account with all the rest. All right, then with
Great.
that.
So we're continued to May 26th at 2 p.m. time certain.
Correct, thank you. May 26th, 2 p.m. time certain. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's hearing. Thank you all, and we are adjourned.